So I need to know the
Okay,
right
I'll call to
times
order
to ask for those
Hastings-on-Hudson Board of Ed meeting, February 10, 2020. We've got some announcements coming up, but before we do that, we want to celebrate a few tenures. And for that, I'm going to kick the meeting over to Dr. Henning-Piedmont.
Sure. Thank you very much, Mr. Sondheim, Board of Trustees. So I'll start with the tenure of an administrator. So, Ms. Casey's and whoever you brought from your family. And you can introduce yourself. Come on up. Your family.
There's just the other 5 or 6.
Oh, that's okay. It's recorded.
A little illness, but
And you'll introduce this half of your family.
yeah, this is my original OG family. Should I introduce you?
Sure, absolutely.
Okay, this is my dad.
Hi there.
Jack, and then my
Hi, Jack.
Good to meet you. And my younger brother-in-law.
And the Board of Education. And you'll come around, you'll be able to shake hands in a second, don't you? It is my pleasure to present Ms. Amy Kazes as a candidate for tenure as principal of Hillside Elementary School. Prior to her current role as principal of Hillside Elementary School, Ms. Amy Kazes spent 14 successful years as a 3rd grade teacher and a staff developer in the Clarkstown Central School District in Rockland County. She later became a literacy consultant, supervisor of literacy and learning, and supervisor of instructional services at Rockland BOCES and Southern Westchester BOCES. These experiences laid the foundation for the development of her strong instructional knowledge base and ability to influence positive outcomes for learners. I think you should be up here, actually. Let's have a look back at you. Ms. Kazes obtained her baccalaureate degree from SUNY Binghamton, Master of Science in Reading and Literacy in Elementary Education from Fordham University, and a Certificate of Advanced Study in School Administration from SUNY New Paltz. This outstanding preparation set her on a pathway of success as a leader of other learners. Ms. Kazes has consistently demonstrated her strengths, talents, and skills as an instructional leader through her leadership and collaboration with teachers to implement a balanced literacy framework for English language arts, which emphasizes the development of research-based reading and writing practices, a philosophy embedded in advocacy and social justice, application of literacy skills that are relevant in all grades and subject areas, an application-oriented focus that stresses critical thinking, collaboration, resilience, civic responsibility, all skills that are fundamental for children throughout their life, careers, and future learning. Ms. Kazes will continue to work with her team at Hillside to transfer these skills, these successes, to other areas. Through social emotional learning, Ms. Kazes created and strengthened interventions and programs for children that support their social skills, positive behaviors, anxiety, and friendships. The Safety Patrol, for example, is a great way for 4th grade students to assist with the morning and afternoon recess periods, greet other children, help facilitate play, and find other ways to enhance the student experience across Hillside. Ms. Kazes works closely and collaboratively with parent groups, including the PTSA and SEPTA, to improve the school climate and school community. Through surveys, Ms. Kazes enlisted feedback from students, staff, and the community to develop ideas to increase options for children during lunch. The HEART program came to life from this exploration. Ms. Kazes is eager to learn and grow professionally by attending workshops and other workshops with other elementary principals in the region, and is an active member of the Tri-State Consortium, a group of high-performing districts interested in continuous improvement. When Amy returns from a workshop or a Tri-State visit, she expects to apply what she's learned by sharing these ideas and implementing practices that will increase the success for all learners. Ms. Kazes will continue to build upon the instructional improvements and upgrades underway at Hillside, and will draw upon her own background as well as seek and utilize feedback from teachers, children, Hillside families, and the community. This is one of the many strengths that Amy exhibits as a leader. Hillside has been shaped by Ms. Casey's leadership, vision, and belief in the success of every child. No one is perfect, and perhaps this is not the measure we should focus on. The measure of a person should be based on what happens during a personal or professional crisis. Amy's grace, dignity, humility, fortitude, courage, resilience, fairness, honesty, integrity, morality, and perseverance are the measures that matter. These are the character attributes that we want our children to exhibit. I am proud to recommend that the Board of Education grant tenure to Ms. Amy Casey as principal of Hillside Elementary School. And I guess you vote now, before you say anything.
Yeah, so with that, do I have a motion to vote on tenure for Amy Casey?
So moved.
Second?
Second.
All in favor? Congratulations.
Thank you so much, Dr. Henning-Piedmont, Ms. Szymanski, and the Board of Education. It has truly been a privilege learning under 4 phenomenal educators here, Dr. Montesano, Dr. Sinanis, Dr. Wilson, and now Dr. Henning-Piedmont, with over 100 years of experience between them. I have had the unique opportunity to see and experience a variety of leadership practices over the last 4 years, and consequently have had the good fortune to embrace many of them as my own. I am lucky to work with amazing students who bring excitement and curiosity to Hillside every day, our talented staff who work tirelessly to do great things for our kids. John, my Hillside teammate, he and I visioned together, planning for the future of Hillside. Our dedicated administrative team who continues to push us to excellence, and our parents, our community, our Board of Education, who have been our partners in ensuring that we provide our children with a stellar, well-rounded, and inclusive education. Finally, I'd like to thank my family. Though they were not all able to be here with me tonight, they have shown unwavering love and support, even when my work takes me away from them. It is because of them that I know how essential education is and how impactful each and every educational experience can be. Thank you all for your confidence in my leadership. I look forward to working collaboratively to continue the excellence Hillside has known and to dreaming together about our dynamic future. Thank you, everyone.
Mr. Adipietro, when you're ready, just a moment.
Thank you, everybody.
Thank you, Amy.
Amy, on behalf of the administrators, congratulations, well-deserved. You're one of our team, and we have your back 100%. So congratulations. You really earned this. So congrats to you and your family. Unfortunately, the high school has 3 recommendations this evening. Unfortunately, none of the 3 are here. There was a little bit of a confusion as to when they needed to be here. They'll be here in the June celebration. One is a brand new father and I believe his wife is sick this evening. The other one has another job, believe it or not. He's a CrossFit junkie and teaches CrossFit in White Plains and is working teaching classes this evening. And the third one has a sick husband and a sick kid. So my apologies. But we have three wonderful people to put up for tenure this evening. Stephen Lopez, who teaches world language, Spanish specifically at the high school. As we spoke to the board, he is a shining star. I believe he is what a passionate educator is all about. So I enthusiastically recommend him to tenure to our superintendent. Stephen Sullivan, who's one of our special educators, who epitomizes the word care. He cares about kids, and his primary focus is the success of every single one of his students, and he brings that every day to everything he does. And our third individual is Maria Rudolph, who's an English teacher in our English department, who works alongside a very tough group, if you know our English department, and has really adjusted to who we are at Hastings, brings rigor, brings structure, and challenges our students every day in their career in English. So it's my pleasure to recommend to our superintendent, who will recommend to you tenure for our all three individuals. So congratulations to all three. I guess this is like the Oscars. I'll accept their plans on their behalf.
So we'll vote on them?
Okay. So do I have a motion to approve tenure for Mr. Lopez, Ms. Rudolph, and Mr. Sullivan?
So moved.
A second?
Second.
All in favor? Okay.
Thank you.
Mr. Eddie Pedro will take their plants up to them.
Okay, now I will pass the meeting back over to Dr. Henry Piedmont for some announcements.
Announcements, sure. A few important items for your attention. Tomorrow we have a curriculum teaching and learning committee that starts at 4. Superintendent's chat is on the following day on the 12th. Ms. Szymanski and I have had some really interesting chats with a few people. That another opportunity is on the 12th from 5 to 6 in the conference, the guidance conference room upstairs. On the 13th, it's the 100th day celebration at Hillside Kindergarten, and that's very exciting at 8:45. Come by and see all the ways in which 100 is represented, and there are plenty of them. February 17th through the 21st, just in case you didn't know, it's schools are closed for midwinter recess. I hope you all enjoy that and rejuvenate and purge all the germs and things that are going around, right? There are plenty of them. February 24th is a special education committee from 4 to 5. Pardon me. There's a policy committee, a student board liaison meeting at 7:30 on February 25th when we come back. Also, a policy committee meeting will meet from 10:30 to 11:30. Also on the 25th, the Farragut Middle School PTSA meeting will take place at 6:30. On the 26th, we have a superintendent's book study, and the book is Most Likely to Succeed, Preparing Our Kids for the Innovation Era by Tony Wagner and Ted Dentersmith. Ms. Szymanski and I held our first book study on that particular text, and it was pretty invigorating. We had about 4 parents, I believe, who came out for that. On February 27th, the Facilities Committee meeting will start at 6:30. Join us if you have nothing better to do. Come on out. On the 27th, there's an 8th grade high school registration and transition parent meeting at 7 p.m. On February 28th and 29th, there's a grade 6 musical. It's at 7 p.m. Mr. Keogh, what's the name of that musical?
Curtains.
Curtains.
Yeah.
Thank you. Curtains. So get your tickets. It's probably a lot of fun. On March 2nd, can you believe it? March. It's the high school PTSA liaison meeting at 6:30, and then a regular Board of Education meeting again. We come back around to March 2nd, and we'll be right here again. A couple more items for your attention. Just so that you know, we posted today in OLAS, our middle school principal vacancy. It will also be posted in the New York Times, and the an Education Week, which is customary. I have a couple of some copies of the posting. So it's in OLOS right now, which is our centralized system for all applications for instructional positions, and Applitrack, which is another online system for applying. I also would like to thank Lynn Walker for her efforts in organizing successfully, as Hastings hosted the 3rd annual Rivertown Schools Diversity Fair. I'd like to thank all the administrators who were present, and the schools that were represented were obviously Ardsley, Dobbs Ferry, Edgemont, Hastings hosted, and Irvington. So we did collect a few resumes, so it was certainly worth our time to be there. And it also gave those candidates an opportunity, to see the districts and to gain a sense of them beyond perhaps what they may have heard or heard from family or friends. At my most recent Southern Westchester school administrators meeting in Valhalla, there was a focus on just bringing awareness around a couple of issues. One is hate crimes have risen in the area, in the region, particularly anti-Semitism. So we really have to make sure that we are obviously reporting these. And in the last communication that I sent out, I did list the hate crimes task force number, which really should be used anytime we see anything. And a lot of efforts are underway to not just normalize this behavior. There's nothing normal about hate. I look forward to our efforts to make sure that we respond appropriately. If another event of that sort happens in our properties, on our properties, and I hope that they don't. But other school districts are certainly experiencing a rise in these hate crimes, and it's very disturbing, but I just wanted to bring that to your attention. I also wanted to bring to your attention an important case called Espinoza versus Montana Department of Revenue. It's a case that the Supreme Court is discussing now, and it has a lot to do with potentially public schools paying the bills for not secular, but religious schools. So that is private religious schools. So that is underway in terms of a discussion at the Supreme Court. And states are paying attention to this because it really would be pretty significant for school districts if they were to have to pay for private religious schools. So I just wanted to bring that to your attention. I didn't know if you knew that or not. We're also taking a look at the special education certification requirements. New York State issued a information document to superintendents with regards to certification that formerly was permissible before ESSA, and it basically allowed a special educator to teach a content area such as math, science, social studies, or in English. This pertained largely to the secondary schools. And that teacher didn't necessarily have to have the certification in that area. That changed under ESSA. So now that teacher who formerly might have taught, for a number of years, a course that he or she was not certified to teach, they can no longer do that unless they possess a particular certification that they would have to apply for. So we are, obviously paying attention to that and seeing what those ramifications are. And we've had conversations with the principals, so we're looking very closely at that, and the directors, and Tessman and Laura are looking very closely at that. The APPR is up for sort of reauthorization, so I don't know what's going to happen with that, but that's just an FYI. And I don't know if you knew this as well, that in 2011, schools were no longer authorized to issue local diplomas to veterans who went into service and who could not complete their high school programs. The state reversed that, so in November of last year, any candidate may submit to any school district evidence of service during World War II, the Korean War, the Vietnam War, and any active duty in the U.S. So if they have, and it could also be a family member, of someone who's obviously deceased. But that's, to me, a pretty significant reinstatement of something that was pretty important. So if you know of any veterans who may have, gone to Hastings and they didn't complete their graduation, let us know, because that would be indeed an honor for us to present that diploma. Thank you. And enjoy next week.
Okay, Ms. Szymanski.
All right, so since our last Board of Education meeting, Dr. Helen Pashley began working with the teachers in grades K through 5. That is our science consultant and expert. She provided updates around upcoming shifts in the state assessments, facilitated a review of the New York State P12 Science Learning Standards, shared a variety of resources to support program alignment, and guided teachers to understand the progression of the cross-cutting concepts. She also provided examples of how the standards could be operationalized in the classroom and shared some interdisciplinary ideas. Further, she shared a variety of resources to support program alignment. She'll be back again on Wednesday to continue the work over at Hillside. And I worked with the Edith Winthrop Teacher Center. There's been a lot of interest in having her return in the spring. And so due to their graciousness, I was able to secure an additional $12,000 in funding so that she can return. And in the interim, alignment efforts will continue there. The Professional Learning Committee met to continue planning for March 18th Superintendent's Conference Day, which at this moment looks like it will include a combination of standards-based work, training sessions offered by faculty members, and some workshops delivered by outside providers. And that committee has another meeting coming up in early March, and the planning efforts will continue. The Diversity Committee met last week and explored implicit bias and microaggressions as the primary areas of focus. I met with Janice Mateo Toledo to plan for upcoming diversity work, which will include interactive read-aloud lab sites with Dr. Dietrich Price, where she models facilitating book talks with students, and training for the aides on implicit bias. And finally, hot off the presses from Melissa Shandroff, on Saturday, February 8th, the Hastings Science Research students participated in the Westchester Rockland Junior Science and Humanities Symposium, which was held at John Jay High School. And Hastings had 2 students who placed second in their categories and will move on to the next level of competition at the Upstate Junior Science and Humanities Symposium, which will be held at SUNY Albany. So I would like to recognize them on her behalf: Mia Wiefkind in neuroscience and Juliana Ochacher in behavioral science. In the poster competition, Daniel Goldberg placed first in physical science. Casey Ostrowski placed second in medicine and health. And Adriana Cubis placed third in medicine and health. Also competing were Rachel Barrer, Allie Manley, Tia Rockland, Julian Jacobs, Ian Ross, Alexander Weitzman, Ivy Meninger, and Sawyer Pollard. Congratulations to all of the students and to our wonderful teachers in the science department, and certainly to Melissa Shandroff for her dedication and all of the wonderful work that's happening around science research.
That's
Thank you.
The safety and security team met again this week, and it happened to coincide with the day we had the lockout that we went into because of an event in another local municipality. And after the meeting, as we spoke about during our debriefing, we spoke about the need to have more monthly type of security meeting, security training. So we're getting that set up, and that'll be something that we're going to prioritize to not only at the building level, but for the ICS team to come together and strengthen our protocols around that and have tabletop trainings monthly. So that's in the works. Finance, I'm currently running our end-of-year projections, which continue to change by the day, and I'll be coming back to the board in March with an estimated end-of-year projection. As I've mentioned at previous meetings, the increase in both the sales tax revenues and our out-of-district tuition have had a positive financial effect, which have helped mitigate some of our unanticipated expenses. Once I have the final number, I will come to make recommendations for any excess that we can put back to our reserves at the year end. Facilities update. The architects, now that the vote is behind us, are going to be able to finalize their plans for the Hillside addition. now that we know that we do, if we have the need to, have the ability to access the funds from the capital reserve. The architects and construction manager continue to work to bring the budget of the project back down from the original dollar amount that we spoke about and we've been kind of using for the last few months. The budget for that project has actually already come down around $300,000 or so. Some of the items that have been included in the reduction in the original cost that was shared with the board are changing some of the windows that have been planned for the back of the cafetorium space. It's not going to impact what Ray had talked about with the natural light. It's just some design features toward the back kitchen area of the design that were changed. Also some windows in the staircases that some, they want to bring some natural light in, but again, just changing some of the design in there was able to save some substantial dollars. There's also a change in some of what was being spec'd in the crafted casework to a prefabricated shelves and storage. There's been a reduction in some of the equipment specs for the kitchen, as well as a change in the specs for the cafetorium space, including some of the acoustical panels and things that initially we had put into the budget to kind of see where it would be. Again, it doesn't compromise the use of that space. It will still function as we needed to function as an cafetorium, but again, these were some things that when you're originally putting the design together, you may have things that are that you can kind of swap out depending on the costs once we get the cost back. The group is committed to finding savings through this process, and every meeting beyond just them going through their normal protocols and talking about the design, that there's always discussion around areas in which we can find savings. Some of the other areas that we've talked about is doing some of the demo work, which again will save, there's at least $50,000 of savings that we've identified there as well. And again, that's constantly in the forefront of our conversation around this work, the entire process. And we hope that we'll be able to bring in all the projects within, or as close to the original authorization as possible. So, thank you. You're welcome.
Thank you. It says $300 here. We should probably.
Oh, 300K. I'm sorry, I need a K. A whole $300 on a 9.2. I know. How do we do it? I know you asked.
We'll take it all.
Yeah.
Okay, thank you. Yeah, and just to underscore that, I think that as the public is likely aware, the vote was extremely close, 7 votes. We've gotten quite a few notes from people in the public ensuring that we're aware of what a close vote means. We are aware of what a close vote means. We realize this isn't a mandate. We will continue to work very closely to figure out how to get some of those costs out. We've known some of those costs would be coming out, but we really haven't been able to talk about it during this vote process. But we will keep a very close eye on that and hopefully use as little of that money as we need to.
And again, that number does still contain construction as well as other contingencies for design, and there's 3 actually contingencies built into that that larger number. So as the further in the process we go along and we identify like the project's finalized, then those numbers will come out as well.
Yeah, I can mention about the recount now.
Oh, sure,
Why don't I
sure.
just mention that now
Yep.
up front. So a note was just sent out about the recount. So 7 votes. We had a lot of people in the community request from us, can you do a recount? So we looked into that, and legally we can't do a recount. So there's Education Law 2034, if any of you are boned up on education law, which is how a recount can actually be done. And once a vote is canvassed, validated, and then by the election inspectors and then delivered, it is then essentially a locked vote that can then only be on appeal, essentially appeal, there's another word for it, but I'm blanking on it, to the Commissioner of Education, can be revisited. So that's where we are right now. So that vote, we cannot as a board authorize the recounting of that vote. The state education commissioner would have to, because it's already been validated by election inspectors. So, and if you want to know more about it, there's about a 4-page law. You can read about that. It's in the email. We provided a link. So the vote does stand. Again, I want to acknowledge the idea that it was extremely close. And we're keeping our eye very much on the expenses as a result of that. We're always keeping our eye on expenses anyways, but I just wanted to underscore that in this situation. Okay, so we've got 3 presentations coming up. I also want to acknowledge that we've got some people who might not want to be here for all these presentations. And so I will give you a second to leave. Let me go through just to give you a preview of what you'll be missing if you do leave. The first is going to be the PTSA program update. And then what's that?
SEPTA, too?
Well,
No, they're
no,
gonna,
no.
they
SEPTA's doing
were,
it differently.
yeah, they're going to do it differently.
Yeah, that was, I think, a
Okay.
late-breaking change here, PTSA program update. Then we're going to do our first pass through our 2021 budget, and then we're going to go through the school climate survey results. So let me just give a second here, because I know there's a lot of different people. If you want to, move on into the next part of your evening, please feel free. And oh yeah, public comment, I didn't get to yet. Let me get to public comment. So while we're doing that, any public comment? Please keep it to 3 minutes and share if you're a resident of Hastings. I didn't think I spotted any public comment, but I shouldn't have passed it over.
You never know.
Never know. Okay, so I'll pass it over to PTSA. Come on.
Hello.
Hello.
My name is Melissa Sprague. I am the co-president this year of the PTSA, along with Ann Cunningham. We represent a board of hardworking parents whose aim it is to inform and engage the community, support and collaborate with teachers, listen to and understand the needs of our students, and connect with the administration to ensure that all voices in our community are heard and that ultimately these schools are a place where our children want to be every day. We
Melissa,
do that.
if you pull the microphone away from you, it'll bang less. Yeah, that's fine. Yeah.
Hit the keyboard. Yep.
Shout it out, Patrick.
So we do that in a number of ways, and Patrick's going to help me show you the slides. Okay, so parent meetings, website and Facebook, and very lengthy, informative, amazing newsletters, thanks to Ann. I'm not going to go through all of this, but you guys get the gist of the parent meetings. They're very important. They happen at each school. It gives the community a chance to hear from the administration really what's happening in each school. Our website and our Facebook page and our newsletters. We also have lots of meetings. We meet with high school students, the advisory committee, and learn from them what they'd like to see and try to make that happen for them. We meet, along with SEPTA, we meet the superintendent and the assistant superintendent on a monthly basis to discuss any issues that arise, any ideas that anyone has. They're always really, it's just a great opportunity to all get on the same page. And the PTSA VPs in each school meet with the principals to discuss and brainstorm potential issues, possible solutions to those issues. And so we're all connected in that way. We also are part of an association with the Rivertown Parents, where we all join forces once in a while and share educational resources. We have a number of initiatives within the PTSA. One is the Inclusion Working Group, which is a subcommittee that was designed to increase the climate of inclusion in our schools. We have the Traffic Safety Committee, which self-explanatory. We do a class size study each year to help make sure that our class sizes are manageable, which is what we all want to see as parents. We do a series of speakers for parents. We've had, recently we just passed a night, March 9th. Dr. Sharon Maxwell and her daughter Chelsea will be here to talk to our parents about raising socially responsible children in a very digital age that we live in now. They will also be here at 3:15 that day to speak to any staff members that might want to come ask questions or hear what they have to say. So we raise funds, and that is to support the grants that we pass to enrich our students' educational experience. And these are some of the ways that we raise funds. And the grants are, as I said, they're to enrich our children's experiences. They could be an assembly, they could be professional development for teachers, they could be a number of things, and anyone in our community can apply for a grant as long as it's approved by the principal of each school or the school that it affects. These are the grants that we've passed just this current year. So as you can see, there's quite a bit that we do. And then we have annual grants that we continuously pass every year. And some of the more important jobs that we do, anonymously helping families who struggle financially, and that's in a number of ways, instrument rentals, lunch, class trips, exams that are costly. We also provide scholarships to high school students and to FMS students. And we organize a lot of community activities to bring our community together. And here are some of them. And that's it. That's what the PTSA does.
That's a lot.
First of all, you could give a master class in getting through PowerPoint. So.
Yeah, that's really awesome.
We should also thank Orly Wilderman for the art and our PowerPoint.
Ah, nice.
That's
She's
nice.
on her own. She's very talented.
I think, more importantly than that, I really noticed, and I think a lot of people in this room are a part of it, that the PTSA is really trying to get the communication up, and the newsletters, I think, are great.
They are.
The design of those, the efficiency of them. I mean, it looks like a real professional newsletter that comes out. It's really effective because you do so much. It's sometimes easy to get lost in all that information, and I think the way you just organized it and disseminate that information has been really great this year. So that's my personal experience.
Yes.
Thank you.
Absolutely.
Okay, so we will
Budget.
go to the budget.
Okay, Maureen, showtime. So, good evening again, and thank you for giving us an opportunity to present sort of the first draft of a budget. Maureen and I started tag teaming with the Budget 101s, and so that's been kind of sort of the behind the scenes, like information or details that typically aren't provided here. So what we want to go into here is really, this is the first official kickoff of the budget presentation to the Board of Education for the 2020-21 school year. So it's my budget until it becomes yours. And Maureen, as you know, has been working tirelessly on every detail, not only the construction project, but on just managing, within the very challenging sort of conditions in New York State. So we'll talk about some of those tonight. But we want to start with first just giving you an overview of just the basics of this meeting and the objectives of this meeting, which is to go over some budget goals, kind of hovering around at sort of the 5,000-foot, sort of view. Budget summary, some major factors impacting the budget, that all districts have to deal with, and the impact of the tax cap and funding challenge. I'll start with just something that's always in the backdrop, which is, we have to educate children well for, a world that they haven't, they're not working in or going to college in yet. And all the budget is, budgets are really, a framework for understanding a system's values and beliefs about educating all children well. And so part of the work that we've been engaged in, certainly through, as I'll take you through a few slides in a minute or two, have been about this question of, how do we prepare children, for life in college and careers in life. And it is different from the high schools and middle schools and elementary schools that we all went through. And it's part of this conversation when we talk about budgets, because it is an aspiration and it is, something that we have to keep on our minds all the time. And the general overall sort of purpose of a budget, yes, Maureen will go through all the numbers for you, but the numbers don't mean anything if you don't have a philosophy that undergirds in sort of the springboard for what the system believes in. And yes, we have to ensure that the district has all the resources necessary to educate all of our children well. The purpose of the budget is to embody, as I said earlier, these beliefs and values and the aspirations of a community for all of its children. And it motivates us to look beyond today, to look out to the future strategically to determine, what our needs are and how do we prepare for those needs. We've gone away from calling these skills 21st century skills. I mean, what are we, 21 years almost into the 21st century? So the skills now are sort of generally skills that are needed for success in an ever-changing world. And our budget is very much about making sure that we begin to think about something this kind of visioning for the future. And we've begun some conversations about this work. One of the groups that has been meeting has been a curriculum and teaching thought group, actually. And some of you in this room are participants in that group. We read a study, or a report called The Future of Jobs, that was just written 2 years ago. Actually, the World Economic Forum just met in Geneva, Switzerland, and some of the things that they do is take a look at this issue of college and career readiness and what are the needs of the workforce. And this is one proxy for the future. There are others. This set of skills comes up over and over again. Whether you're reading this report, you're reading Tony Wagner or Denter Smith or any number of futurists, they talk about this collection of skills as being really essential for all young people. And while we may not, have these on our walls, our teachers are thinking about these, and these have to be at the heart of our discussions as well. So whether they are embedded, they very much are a part of conversations that we've been having, and we have to have, because this is the world, and these are the set of skills that our young people have to master and be very agile and nimble around as they prepare for life, work, and future learning. There's certainly promises and challenges as we look at this ever-changing world where so many of the jobs that young people are going to have, if you take the average kindergartner, we don't really know what jobs they're going to have, and the jobs that they're going to have have probably not even been invented. And that's a reality for a lot of what's ahead. And that doesn't mean that it's foreboding or it's a source of fear. It's a reality. And school districts have to start thinking about those realities, and we have undertaken this. And I think, thanks to the support of the Board of Education, book studies. And we completed the Ted Denter Smith book study on what school could be. And he kind of, took us on this journey, around the country to see different images of teaching. And one of the quotes that stuck with me is this one: "Advances in the coming decade will be of an order of magnitude more disruptive than 2007, the year that smartphones debuted and they began reshaping society." And that's pretty significant. Another sort of major thought, which comes from the book study that we're just starting with Most Likely to Succeed, Preparing Our Kids for the Innovation Era. And I mentioned to you we had our first book discussion, and we'll continue to have others. Well, one of the profound statements that we discussed in that group last week, Ms. Szymanski and me, was this quote: "The purpose of education is to engage students with their passions and growing sense of purpose, teach them critical skills needed for career and citizenship, and inspire them to do their very best to make the world better." And that's one of those aspirations, and that book sort of holds promises for us as we think about, that our budget is to also be a part of pushing forth the sort of idea that our system is very much aware of these kinds of goals that lots of school districts are looking at. And finally, Denter Smith and Wagner sort of phrases this world that we're in the following way: Lifetime employment with a large company is increasingly unlikely. Individuals will change jobs, companies, and even professions many times in their lifetime. In today's world, if you can't invent and reinvent your own job and distinctive competencies, you risk chronic underemployment. Now that's pretty profound. And as I said, it may sound frightening, and it's not to portray this sort of, the future as a frightening world, but these are the realities that are very much sort of hovering around the development of our budget as we think about, what do we believe in, and how are we organizing teaching and learning for our children that represents this world that's ever-changing, and that we do have to think about how we adjust to that so that our children are experiencing those kinds of skills that do prepare them, for that life, not just to go off into college. I mean, and college is one of those choices to students. A couple of us visited BOCES today, and I hope we'll hear about some of that later on, where career and technical education is another very fundamentally important opportunity for young people. So in sort of the broad strokes of this, before Maureen gets into the numbers of this, is that there's always an underlying philosophy or belief that makes a budget something that we all pay attention to, not just because, yes, it means that this is how we pay for everything, but it's also how we enact our beliefs and our goals for our children. Now we'll get into the nuts and bolts.
Fun stuff. Okay. So the budget itself is broken down into 4 major categories, and these categories come to us from the state, and each of the subgroups that fall under it, and that's how we're required to report and code our budget. So the 4 major appropriation categories that all districts abide by are general support, which includes the areas of the Board of Education, central administration, meaning the superintendent's office and HR, finance, legal, operations, maintenance, and our insurance. So it's just really the cost of running the building, the overhead of the operation. In the instructional category, and we're going to summarize kind of and show you some of the increases and decreases in these various categories. That includes the Office of Curriculum, supervision, that's the principals and their offices, teaching, including special education, library, instructional media, pupil services, technology, and co-curricular and athletics. Transportation, again, that's a standalone, obviously, category, both in district and out. And undistributed, which is really the employee benefit and debt portion of the budget. And what we always mention at this point is the undistributed, the majority of the expenses related to there really are in direct support of the instruction, because that's where all the benefits for the majority of our employees, well, all of our employees, but specifically the majority of that category is in fact in employee benefits. Do you want? Okay.
So part of what, you've seen this probably a few times, and certainly if you were at the Budget 101s, Maureen and I talked about this notion of the goals around our budget. And we absolutely want to uphold what the community wants, which is to maintain core programs and resources for all of our children. We want to make sure that they have access to higher level and rigorous courses, whether they're college courses, in conjunction with the work that they're doing in their classes here at the high school or off premises, or that they're taking something that leads to a college credit or two after they complete that course. All of that's a fundamentally important part of our belief system around educating all of our children well. We need to invest in professional learning for all of our professionals, not because there's a deficit, not because someone isn't working hard. So teaching is hard. I had to have a cupcake at the end of the day every day. I was much, much younger, mind you. But it is very difficult to teach all day and then to come home and to grade papers, not go to sleep, grade papers. So it's not because teachers are, don't have the skills. It is challenging work. It's never perfect, and it can always be better. And the professional learning offered here or mentioned here is in that spirit. We need to maintain our facilities. Our schools are our most valuable part of our communities, and they represent our values and beliefs, and the upkeep of those are just as important as the philosophies that we have that undergird all of our budgets. You can look at a room or a building, and you can conclude certain things about the facilities. The degree to which they're being cared for, and the degree to which they're not. So Maureen and her team pay a lot of attention to maintaining our facilities and keeping them clean and doing our part. And then obviously staying within the budget cap. We have to. It's been around now for what, 7 years? About 7 years. It's not going away. We recognize that. And we're mindful of it, and there are certain, goals that, while that's a reality, there's still, some, tough decisions that have to be made in the future, because the ways in which we manage that tax cap is also a pressure and a challenge on the system.
Okay, so part of when we look at the realities in creating a budget each year, and there are many things that have to be are contributing factors. Every year there's additional mandates that are put on schools by either the state or the federal government, and none of them come with any type of financial support or financial relief. So, it could be anywhere from testing to security, a variety of things that we're required to do, lead testing in the water. Again, important things, but again, there's many things that get rolled out at once, and we're required to do them, but there's no funding available to address those items. There's an uncertainty in the state aid funding, here, again, in New York. The foundation aid has been underfunded since the inception of foundation aid, and I know Hastings has been underfunded to at least a tune of close to $1 million each year. I mean, year after year after year, and that is not, we're not alone in that, but that is a continuing challenge for us. So again, although foundation aid has never, since the inception, been fully funded by the state of New York, and I don't think, in their current financial condition, I don't think it will be happening anytime soon. We are getting a modest increase in the formula, but again, it's not implemented. We are seeing some slight increases that we're happy to receive, but again, it's not, those increases are very small incrementally, to address a lot of increase in costs that we see. Again, there's always that concern of the shifting aid to upstate districts, New York City and Big Five, who really have always gotten a huge share of the monies available within the state budget. And again, they are high needs districts, and I think that the state will continue to need to will be prioritizing those districts. So again, because of that, we don't look to see, we're not going to be able to rely on the state to bail us out anytime soon. Again, we've had changes in enrollment beyond our trend data. So each year, although it could be, small incremental increases, we've had a steady increase in enrollment, and that there's an increase in cost with an increase in enrollment, and that's something that, again, we don't get financial relief for that. We have to address it within the parameters of the budget cap. Special education services, again, the cost in delivering those services, that's something that factors into our budget every year, and these are all student-based needs, and it changes with new enrollment, and again, with the idea to, again, stay in the least restrictive environment, which is always a goal when we're looking at that area of the budget.
And in terms of community expectations, kind of hit on that. Class size is very important. There's an expectation in this community. I think I've heard the reference to this being a private school and a public school sort of venue, and that the notion of class size is very much a sort of a part of that belief system. And we work hard to make sure that we maintain that. Academic programs are very important, ensuring that our children, are experiencing the rigorous courses, and variety in their courses, that give them opportunities to apply their skills to solve real problems and to go outside of their classrooms into other venues to learn and explore and become intellectually curious about the world around them. So it's very important for us to be able to maintain those programs and to grow other programs. Arts and music and athletics and electives are very, very important. So just because there's a class where there are 8 or 9 children attending it, it doesn't mean that's a class that we can collapse. So it's not as easy as that. There's a philosophy that undergirds the importance of that class or that elective or that team that makes it very important. I mean, again, the school is the center of the community, and this is where our children, explore, try things out, see if they're good at certain things, move on, develop new friendships, and so forth. So it's not an insignificant part of their lives. The alternative program, the HASP program, I mean, I can't say enough good things about that program and some of the students that I've met and the work that, the middle school leadership team and counseling team and who work, arm in arm with the teachers there to make sure that the children have the second, third, fourth, fifth, sixth turn and chance to get through some difficult times in their lives and to also be, here in their school. They don't leave their school to go, any place. They stay right here. And I think that's a real luxury and a real gem that, a lot of schools wish they had. So it's a really valuable part of the experience for high school. And obviously security and safety, and we're talking about that today. We rely upon the cameras. We rely upon them as another source of, kind of gaining a sense of what's going on the grounds and the buildings and so forth. When we look up now and we see cameras, we don't now sort of, wonder, do you have toilet paper on your shoes or anything like that, as you'd be embarrassed about. But it's really a source of, really a sense of security, right? And you were asleep out there, so I had to kind of, shake you up a little bit.
So again, these are the major budget areas. Yes.
Is it hot in here?
Yeah,
It's so hot.
I am the only one awake.
Oh, thank you.
Let me know if it's too.
I'm always
Okay.
So these are the major expense items that impact our expenses each year when we're going into creating our budget. We have our contractual obligations. We've spoken, a lot about those. Each person who's employed by the school district operates under a contract, and with those contracts, there's contractual obligations that we are required to pay each year. We have programs and AP courses and a variety of things that, again, would impact things that we offer, offerings that Valerie just spoke about, the different expectations and things that people expect for us to be running, and again, the cost of running programs. I think Valerie had mentioned some of them may have low enrollment numbers, but again, that is something that we know that that's very important to our community, and there is a cost in running programs such as that. Pension costs, again, we are experiencing the new state retirement systems for next school year. We've been notified that there is an increase in the cost in funding those, and that's a very significant increase for us, and it's a significant portion of our budget every year anyway. Health insurance increases, again, it's everyone, we're not immune to the increases that nationwide people are experiencing in health insurance costs, and actually considering our plan, they've been doing a fairly good job managing that, but again, it is a significant dollar amount increase year over year. State and federal mandates, I spoke about those a little bit earlier and how that impacts us. Enrollments and class size, again, having some more favorable class sizes, there's an impact to our overall budget in running those classes at that size. And then, of course, capital projects and debt, which, again, are part of our facilities and are a part of the overall spending plan each year. So here, just to kind of give you some high-level year-to-year budget variances, and I'll kind of go through these. Without any new initiatives, the following budget variances occur. Each year, just year over year, we have salary increases. There's, depending upon occupational education, Valerie had mentioned that earlier, so that would be something depending on the enrollment in there or students that may be interested or it would be a good, opportunity for them. These drive, because these are by student participation, and the cost of that program, will vary from year to year. The cost of related services for students, an increase or out-of-district placements and tuitions, increase in legal expenses, equipment needs that need to be, again, like anything else, you buy it, there's a replacement cost. We have all the smart boards, but then once they're all here, every few years, we need to do a refresh of all the technology, of course, is a huge piece of our spending. AEDs, even things like that, they have a lifetime. We're constantly replacing, that's life-saving equipment. There's furniture replacements. BOCES increase in services, they pass along the costs of their increases to us. increase in the TRS rate to 9.5% and an increase of 3.5 in health insurance. And the reason all of these are mentioned is because just by moving from last year, the current year we're in, to next year with not changing one thing, the increase of our budget over budget with some of these kind of factors would be 1.8 million, just with doing nothing, not one extra. So that's kind of where we started, and that was based upon, these are like known factors that, depending upon these things, that, you know, have dollar to over dollar increases.
So this became a very challenging part of this whole budget development process. And we really had to look at, you know, how do we maintain our commitment to our current, you know, philosophies that are embedded in the program and the decisions around the programs. And that became some work that we did with the budget managers, and we asked them to take a look at their budgets, and they had to, you know, be able to look at ways in which we could maintain our commitment to our current initiatives without, you know, completely, you know, changing course. The administrators have to look at student learning and the social emotional needs, and there's efficiencies everywhere, and our degree to which we evaluate programs to make sure that we're paying attention to things that may not be working, and maybe, you know, we shift gears or change, you know, course in some way. So that's an important part of you know, what the budget managers engage in as they look at their budgets and develop their budgets. Focus on fiscal sustainability. I mean, if we can't manage it from year to year and the cost or runaway, you know, we have to really, you know, shift gears and begin to look at ways in which we can sustain, you know, programs and look at ways to, you know, to keep programs that we value, but perhaps, you know, using some other funding, you know, methodologies. We always have to consider efficiencies in personnel and supplies. You know, what do we have to order? You know, if we look at closets, you know, do we have to replenish things? I mean, things that we may take for granted, but that's a lot of money every year if we don't pay attention to those things. So obviously our budget managers do look at those, and through a zero budgeting mindset, you know, consider those things that they need because they have a solid need for them, and decrease those that they don't. Contractual expenses, whether it's for a particular type of service or a consultant or anything that we have a contract around to do business with. We look at those. We're always looking at ways to keep cost sort of under control. That's why we use our BOCES a great deal, because there is a reimbursement at the end of the school year. So we want to take advantage of that to every degree possible. And equipment, obviously, you know, what don't we need? And certainly Maureen and her team, you know, spend a lot of time looking at, you know, what they need. And at the end of the day, the budget managers bring forth, you know, I'm not saying that it's easy, but they bring forth some ways in which we can, you know, close our budgets within the parameters that we have to work within.
Again, this is just a list. I'm not going to go back through it, but again, we talked about unfunded mandates. Again, this is something, as we're preparing our budget, these are all things that push and increase our costs year over year. And this is just a very small partial list of some of those. And again, they have to be incorporated. They have to be accounted for in our spending plan each year. So again, this graphic, and we use this during our Budget 101, I think it really just demonstrates the things in which we have control over. And much of the budget, as we spoke about, there's, you know, plenty of parts of it that we're required to do, and we have no control over. And then we're also very limited in the sources of revenue that we receive. Again, we spoke about the state, and although we're, you know, happy to get what we do receive from them, it's something that the majority of our budget relies on the local taxpayers to fund. And again, trying to balance the expenses that increase year over year with within a tax cap budget, it's fairly difficult. And the more years you're into it, it becomes even more challenging each year. So this is just the preliminary, and again, I showed this. This is a way that districts, again, were required. These are the main categories and buckets that we're required to, you know, put our budget into. This is just a preliminary overview. And we're going to get a little bit more into each category and speak a little bit about the percent changes year over year. But as you can see here, our general support budget, and I'll speak to what is driving the cost there. It's mostly legal costs that we've been experiencing, but that budget change year over year is right now looks to be about 5.76%, and there's some other costs. As we get further into the details of the budget, we'll start unpacking what is the drivers of these different increases. Our instructional budget is showing an 805 budget to budget of a 2.52% increase. Again, we've had some retirements that actually, that's actually reflecting some adjustments that we, were fortunate to have some reductions in costs, or else that number was actually initially was larger than that. Our pupil transportation, we've been able to pretty much hold that cost down, and again, we'll get further into detail when we get into the detailed budget proposals, but we're showing a slight increase there. Our undistributed, as I mentioned before, there was an increase to our teachers' retirement contribution year over year, and the health insurance, and that's really driving the increases in that category. In terms of revenues, as you see, the good news is that the state informed us that we are scheduled to get an increase in some state aid next year. Much of it is being driven by expense-driven aids, which means that we spent additional funds in different areas, and that's why we're getting more money. It's not really an increase as much as we're spending more, and we're getting back some additional funds there. So again, but we were happy to receive an increase, and that's about a little bit over $200,000. The miscellaneous receipts, again, is being driven mostly by the increase in the local sales tax. There was a change in the percentage, the local percentage in Westchester County, and also there's an increase in overall spending in Westchester County. Also, I just read a report about that yesterday. So between those two factors, we're seeing a nice increase in some of those revenues, as well as our out-of-district tuition, that is other districts placing students here, and those two are driving the majority of that increase in the miscellaneous receipts. We were seeing an increase in our interest income, but and it's significantly up this year over what it was last year, but the Fed has cut the rate again, so that is going down a bit, but we're still trending higher than we projected. And then we've talked a lot about that we've been reducing, well, we have to, because we won't continue to be able to fund the amount of appropriated fund balance, but year over year, we've been reducing the amount of appropriated fund balance we're using to offset our budget. So this reflects a reduction of $300,000 in appropriated fund balance to offset this budget, and that's really monies that would be left over this fiscal year to offset next fiscal year. So when people say, where's the money go after the year's over, part of it would go to balancing future budgets. So again, but we're looking to bring that amount down, and each year we need to reduce the reliance on fund balance to balance our budgets. The reserve for the pension contribution, the recommendation is to fund that at a little higher level, and that's really to offset the significant increase we've seen this year. And in the years where you are getting a significant increase in the pension cost, it's appropriate to use more money from that. In years, if the rate were to go back down, then we wouldn't put as much toward it. That's purposeful, and that we should be making that offset there. I'm making a recommendation not to use any more funds out of the tax certiorari to offset budgets. We feel the rate we have in there now, we would like to hold that, and we feel with the increase of other revenues and other categories, that helps us offset the need for using any more money out of that fund. And as you can see, that results in a property tax levy of $1.3 million. Tax cap compliant is 1.363. So we're just a few $1,000s below our max cap based upon the information we have. There's a few exclusions. We're still waiting for the state hasn't finalized the BOCES exclusion, but I don't think it would change that number significantly, maybe by a few thousand. And the resulting tax rate in that levy that we're currently projecting is an increase to taxpayers of 1.04% increase on individual homeowners' taxes. So again, the levy is the changeover, which is what the tax cap looks at, but the resulting tax rate for homeowners is actually resulting in a 1%. So there's two different numbers there. So we're happy that it was a fairly low increase.
This one we've shown a few times, and it's symbolic because a big portion of what it takes to run the system is tied into salaries and benefits of the school district. So like a service organization, which, we've referenced our school system as, everyone here provides a service, to children. And in doing so, it represents the largest expenditure that we have in our budget. So 80% of all resources that come into the district, all revenue, is used to pay the salaries of all the people in the system who are here to support the education of all the children. Salaries and benefits are budgeted as zero-based, using a zero-based approach. It simply means that if we have a retirement of an educator whose ending salary was $140,000, we're not going to hire another educator at that same amount. We're going to bring that educator in at a different amount. Usually it's a beginning teacher, someone who maybe had a couple of years of experience. So they're going to look different on the salary schedule. So that's one of the major ways in which we do exercise that approach to keep down cost. And each position that any budget manager recommends is based upon, our review class size. Do they really need it? Have we experienced an increase in enrollment? What do the needs of children? What do children need as per what's described in IEPs, and any other special course offerings that we view to be of value and benefit to our children in the school system.
Yeah, and I just want to, mention that last piece again. Sometimes people will see a decrease, it could be a decrease, a recommended decrease to say in an 8, but it's not that you're cutting it for the budget, but you're cutting it based on that last statement. Increases and decreases are based on need. It's not only, when we look at the budget, everything's need-based. In some years, there's a shift that actually can result in a decrease, even with class size as well.
Exactly.
So we always look at it from that perspective, and then see how it fits in our overall spending plan. Okay, so as I mentioned before, we're going into just a little bit more detail, and again, on March 2nd, we'll be unpacking these in further detail, but I'll just kind of, this is just a highlight of the general support overview, and it kind of breaks down a little, it gives you a little bit more detail into the categories that are driving the increase in the overall increase in the general support category of $260,000. The Board of Ed, as you can see, it's a very small increase there, and it's just related to spending around like policies and some things that were kind of passed on cost as the board docs and different things we use to manage the operation of the Board of Education. There's just a very small increase there. The adjustment here in the chief school admin, and this is related, there's two things. We're actually in our first year of having to report under ESSA financially, so that's the school district's component of it. The first reporting is due March 1st. And because of that, as I'm looking at how we have historically categorized expenses, we're moving things to align better with other school districts. So in looking at the chief school admin, you'll see a reduction of $83,000. The reason for that is that money is actually being moved to a category that it is more appropriate for those expenses to be related to our personnel, part of our personnel function, the cost of running that, which is our personnel assistant, and part of another staff member who also helps support that. Their salary was in this category, and technically it really should have been coded under personnel. Just historically it's been there, but with ESSA reporting, I started to look at other schools and where they're reporting different expenses, and because of that I wanted to move it this year with the budget, because I am reporting those under personnel, and it's not really a function of the superintendent's office. So that was something I had just done. So you'll see a decrease in there, and then you'll see in another category where there's an increase as well. Finance, which is the operation of my office, it also includes the 3 audits that we receive each year. The majority of the increase there is due to the fact we have to go with bonding next year. There's costs associated with issuing bonds, and there's need for both bond counsel as well as going through Moody's, and there's a cost in doing that reporting. So the majority of the cost increase here, there's about $15,000 of professional services that we're going to have to budget for next year as part of our bond our bond issuance, and so that's driving that, and then the following year it would of course go away. Legal, personnel, and public info, $83,000 of this increase here is coming directly from the reduction that I spoke about earlier in the chief school admin category. And then the rest of it is really being driven by, our legal expenses. Again, this is not unique to Hastings. I was actually looking, again, as part of the ESSA at some of our counterparts' budgets. And legal costs just in general are, every school district is seeing a tremendous increase in the cost of legal services because there's just a different world, and there's just a lot more need for it. And, although you do spend money here, it could save you money in the future. So this is really based upon what we've seen our trend to be for the last 2 or 3 years. We've seen an increase. So this reflects over $100,000 of increase in litigation expenses, which I think is needed. Operations and maintenance, this is all the building and facilities. Again, the increases here are mostly driven by some slight increase in energy costs. They're actually coming down, thankfully. I mean, the cost of oil, but again, it wasn't as great as it's been in years past. But a big part of this is we need to do our lead testing next year, and that's about $30,000 of that increase is being driven by that. And the rest are contractual expenses and energy costs. Special items, that's the insurance for the district, as well as children that are in borderline properties that are attending other school districts, BOCES admin costs, and the majority of the increase here is being driven by the BOCES admin costs, which is a pass along to us. So they've had some increases in their administrative budget, and I think $25,000 of that overall increase is just a pass along to us. And we're required to pay it, and that is the increase, the total increase in the general support. And like I said, some of them are non-recurring costs, so we anticipate then the following year, without needing lead testing and some items like related to issuing bonds, that'll actually, some of those expenses are one-time onlys. The instructional budget here, again, we're going to get into much greater detail. So just to kind of just quickly highlight, the decreases in supervision are due, Valerie had mentioned today, we know that our principal is retiring at the middle school, and as Valerie had mentioned, when you replace someone, there's usually, there's an opportunity, because if somebody's been in a job for 20 years, someone coming into it, of course, would make a lesser salary. So the decrease here is reflective of the savings we anticipate. And it's a net cost because people also are getting increases in that. So we anticipate the savings to be higher than that for the new hire. But again, it's offsetting some of the increases in costs that would be in that category. Our teaching, again, we had a couple of retirements this year. We're going to get into, the staffing that's included in that number. But right now we're anticipating around $170,000 increase in that cost. Our special ed budget is, again, these are driven on student needs and based upon the recommendation of the special ed department. And right now, we see that category, budget category, is growing, increasing by $557,000. Media technology, the increase there is mostly due to just, again, some replacement of equipment and items such as that. And we'll unpack what the plan is for those funds in that year, as well as also the other increase here is the second line that we're running, the redundant line. That's also part of the increase that we're seeing in next year's budget. Guidance, again, small increase. These are all contractual increases for the folks that work in the guidance department. The health increase is mostly driven on what we have seen is that the need for many students when they go out on trips. There's been an increase in nursing services overall, just in terms of a lot of it's driven on student need. If students need, we're seeing a big increase of nurses going out on more field trips and things like that. And this is based really upon the experience that we've been seeing this year, and I had to adjust the budget to accommodate for those increases. Psychologists, again, this is just reflective of the contractual increases in that department for the members of that department. And we are, in fact, reflecting here a reduction in both co-curricular and athletic spending. And when the budget managers come to present, they'll speak to some of that. And again, this is just either, looking at our overall and tightening up where we can, where we think we can comfortably reduce some of the costs there. So our total instructional budget currently is showing an increase of $800,000, which as is a big portion of our overall tax cap increase, and 2.52% year over year. Transportation, we're happy that hopefully we'll even get that lower if we can get some additional efficiencies. But right now, we're anticipating a small increase of 2.49%. The majority of that is just being driven by some bus monitor increases, which is not a significant dollar amount, but just the year-over-year cost and the time that they're riding the buses. Out-of-district transportation, these are all these contractual costs that are going up a bit, but overall 2.49. The undistributed portion budget. As I mentioned before, we are experiencing an increase. Now, this past year, 1920, we actually had the opposite. We had a decrease in the TRS rate. So this past year really helped us quite a bit when we were balancing the 1920 budget. Unfortunately, now the rate is in fact going back up, and the increase here reflects an increase of the rate that we're required to pay. Social Security, again, this is just based upon, we feel the budget this year was a little bit higher than it needed to be. This is just a matter of adjusting it to actual, coming down a bit. We had some additional funds, and when we unpack the budget, we'll get into why we felt comfortable reducing that a bit. Workers' comp, this is just based on the rate. It's based upon our experience rating, and we are going to be going up $10,000 in that amount. And health insurance, again, I mentioned that earlier, that's another driver of our budget. It's going up $213,000. So the overall cost in the total employee benefits is going up $400,000 year over year. And these are reflective of actually, tightening up some areas. So these are after the rollover. And undistributed, this is just our debt. We, as you can see by this slide, the only debt we're currently paying on and are planning on paying for next year is from our 2014 bond. The plan, I've been trying to strategically hold off on any type of borrowing so that the debt of the new bond will not start to be paid for until the following fiscal year. So next year we'll just have the one bond, so that next bond hasn't come on yet. And again, I'm sorry, yes?
Do we ever get an adjustment on this rate?
Well, it's a reduction. No, it's a reduction. Well, if you can just see that those are just the principal and interest. It's just the way the schedule went. But we actually refinanced. This was fairly new debt, and anything prior to that, we only have one bond out right now. So we borrowed this at a very favorable rate, and it's non-callable to get that rate. It was like less than 3%, which at the time, was actually a very good rate. So now we're not going to change that one. Okay, revenue overview. If anyone can see this, I can. So again, this is just highlighting, I'm mentioning earlier some of the increases, and again, just to highlight that the other charges for services, those are just custodial fees. That's really just a reflective of overtime we charge outside groups to use our building. We think that'll hold steady. We haven't had any movies coming to us this year, unfortunately, but right now we feel we'll make that revenue projection for next year as well. Day school tuition, we're actually seeing a reduction. We have a bunch of, that's just parents who parentally place their students in the school. Right now, we're anticipating we have a few students graduating, and we are actually, it's showing a reduction of income there. But we are, in fact, gaining tuition in other districts, and there's an increase of about $200,000 in revenues there for next year. These are things we have to look at very closely, because if a district, we're very careful and mindful about putting these revenues here, and sometimes if we're not sure on it, we don't even want to put it there, because one or two students could make this number change by $200,000 or $300,000, and that would have a, you don't want to become overly reliant on it, because kids move, districts can pull students back. So we're very cautious in what we think is the right number to be put there when we're developing our budget. Interest, I mentioned that before, although this year I think we're scheduled to make $190,000 in interest. The interest rate was cut, so we're worried. We're hearing that it may be cut again next year, so we're just putting $140,000, which again is an increase over what we budgeted last year. And then the sales tax revenue we spoke about, and then state aid. And then the remainder you can see has to come from levy on taxes, and that's where we get that $1.3 million when everything is told out. And it's an actual increase of total revenues of almost $1.5 million. Budget history, this here, just to again remind people in our tax rate specifically, we have a budget to budget increase, and there's a column there, and you'll see actually in 11-12 where we actually had a decrease in our overall spending from the prior year, and it resulted in actually a negative tax increase that year. And these are all like in the tax cap era, so there have been times when when we have been able to, we've actually reduced our spending, which is after that a lot of districts, because then you lose the ability to levy that tax cap money, and really since then we've decided to because the first year of the tax cap there was a sense that you could, if you didn't levy it one year, there was more carryover, and then once people realized it wasn't as simple as that, we've pretty much made the recommendation to levy as close to the tax cap as possible. But even in looking at that, if you look at the right-hand column, you'll see that, you know, between 11-12 and 2021, I mean, there has been a big effort to try to keep the tax rate increases that are given to our residents as low as possible. Even since 1819 to current time, over the past 3 years, the taxes for individuals would have been less than 3% over a 3-year period. So we are very mindful in developing the budget, and we'll continue to, you know, attempt to try to be as financially sustainable as possible. And the 1 year in there, that's when they went to the full evaluation, and there was that new property came on. And many people, if their assessment didn't change, actually did have a significant tax rate decrease in that year. Again, this is just a graphic of that, and it kind of just shows where we've been, and it's our budget rate and our budget to budget, and you can see in that 1 year when the tax rate actually went down, when there was an increase in the overall assessment of the town. This is just, again, we've gone over this in the past budget meetings. This is the actual tax cap formula that we're required to use, and it's the template, and this is how you calculate what is your actual tax cap for each year. And the only thing that is really unique to a district is their tax-based growth factor and their debt. So for us, above the line, the top portion of the formula is really driven on things that are unique to Hastings. So the tax-based growth factor is provided to us by ORPS, which is the Office of Real Property Services, and they that number is based upon the assessment in the town growing. So again, the assessed valuation of the town Hastings-on-Hudson has grown, and that allowed us to increase our taxes in addition to the regular tax cap number by another 1.0139%. And that number is unique to us, and that is part of the formula. The debts or exclusions, and then the 1.81, we've spoken about it, is the amount that amount can never exceed 2%. So really, what that meant for us was a little bit over 3% increase year over year, which, you know, we were happy to have the growth factor. As you can see by this table I mentioned before, we're very slightly under in the current calculation the allowable tax cap by $3,500. And again, we went over this in Budget 101, and this is just really a definition, and all these slides will be online, and as there's different things when you look at those, the spreadsheets, and just to kind of understand what the allowable growth factor is and what the CPI is. And I think we just provided this so that if someone, you know, were to try to figure out the difference between the two, that gives you a definition about how the CPI and what it's tied to, and the growth factor that we spoke about. And again, these are provided to us by the state. This is not something we calculate for ourselves.
And future meetings, Maureen and I and the budget managers will join us on March 2nd, and they will actually go into their budgets and present line by line, and you'll get to see not only that, but what they would have added or they had hoped to add and couldn't add. And then additional things that they had to reduce in their budgets to meet our goal of being able to close our budget. So it was not an easy task, and it's something that, you know, we have to talk about, and talk about it from the standpoint of advocacy in the region. The governor feels that districts like West, you know, in this region are wealthy, and there's no need for any additional funds. And I'm not, you know, certainly I'm not against the fact that there are districts that do, but we've talked and have been to a variety of things where advocacy is becoming more and more important. You know, we need to find a way to tell the story about Hastings in relationship to other districts like us, and, you know, and how this structure, you know, is not sustainable. You know, when no additional revenues are coming in, and we still have to, you know, our enrollment remains the same, and we still want to have an excellent school system. You know, it becomes, you know, that the strategy of, you know, simply going in and tightening up is not sustainable. So these are the featured meetings mandated. Any place you go in the state of New York, this is going to be the schedule in terms of reviews on the 16th and the 30th. And then on April 21st, is traditional across the state of New York. It's budget adoption. And then the budget hearing and then the budget vote on May 19th. So we hope that, those of you who can't come are able to review these presentations online.
And as I had mentioned, I mean, there can be potentially like some tweaks in our current overview between now and when the board adopts the budget, because during that time, we hope to have our final state aid number that may, make us adjust some things one way or the other. And then other things that could happen between now and then that would, either make us have to make a tweak or two to our spending plan. So that's that.
Does anyone on the board have any high-level questions?
Yeah. Can you just walk us through the 557,000 increase in special education?
Sure. So.
Or is that better?
No, I think,
when
the budget manager will
here?
come that night, but again, I was just going to answer at a very high level.
Sure.
As I had mentioned before, the budget is driven on student needs. So when you see an increase, it is tied to actual, like the special ed budget more so than any other budget, really is that it's really tied to a very specific need of a child, and that's what drives the cost and everything, but that's what you're seeing reflective there. And actually that number was even tightened up a bit from what it initially was.
And it's the price of bringing children back, which is a goal and priority to their home district, and fulfilling our obligation to providing the least restrictive learning environment for children. So when we do bring children back, which is a goal, we want to make sure that those transitions are smooth. So we have to provide the services for that child, which could be a teacher assistant or a teacher aide. It could be a smaller ratio of adults to students, and so that's a pretty significant consideration when we are trying to, as Laura and Tesfa, try to ensure that children who are placed outside of the district are brought back and educated in the district if we have the programs here. But as I said, return doesn't mean that it reduces the budget. Return means that they're here and that we can certainly, through professional learning and the expertise of many of our educators and the hard work of Laura and Tesfa, we can begin to see savings through efficiencies, not because we're just reducing services. We wouldn't just reduce services for the sake of reducing services, and that would be against the IEP. But certainly efficiencies are one of the ways in which we can see how to best use the resources, because we wouldn't want children in a room where there are more adults than children. That's not an efficient system.
But sometimes it is just an accounting issue, right? Because that's going up as an expense, but we're bringing kids back and we're not paying out, or we're not paying out extra tuition, and so it really becomes about where it's showing up.
Be able to present
That's
the
how it
budget, because I
happened
think
years
special ed
back.
is unique, that it could be in, it could be out. It's based on the students' needs and what's on their IEPs. I mean, that's
Right.
that's it. You know what I mean? Like,
But
it's like
in years past, we did talk about the
No, it
fact
could,
that
yeah.
the budget was going up
Sure.
in-house, but then what we were paying out
Yeah, of
was
course.
less,
Yeah, yeah.
right?
So,
I think it's a combination. Though,
It
if I
is.
remember, if I
in
remember the budget correctly.
so in this case, just to drill on this one,
Sure.
is it multiple services that make up the 557, or
it's-
individual service, or can you
No.
just add some more context?
You're going to need more context because it's many different pieces. I can speak to one increase. There is an increase in a behavioralist to work in the district, to Valerie's point, bringing students back but not having, the services of a behavioralist will not, then the kids, it may be something that for next year we invest more heavily in to make sure that the students are properly supported here, but that would be an example of an increase. That is one of the increases out of that number. I think that line item increased by $100,000. And that would be an example of an increase in expense that may not be forever, but it may, just be to support the needs of bringing students back and to properly support them. So that's an example of a part of that increase that is unique.
And the other part is, we also want to make sure, and Tesfa and Laura, work with other school districts. If we have a program, we want to tuition in students from other districts. And that requires us to make sure that those programs are attractive and are, working at a level where, we can, obviously educate our children well, but also for those who are coming into the district. Because what we don't want to do is not have the proper level of services, and then those children, leave, and that's what, Maureen mentioned earlier, then we see a drop in that revenue from those tuitions, and that's, they're pretty impactful. So we have to grow the programs to make sure that they're effective and provide the proper, supports and oversight and to make sure that they are working at the level that ensures that children are successful. So that does indeed, require some expenditures.
So the other 457 is growing the program.
Can I suggest that we have this
Yeah,
conversation as a
I think it's going to
holistic
be,
conversation?
yeah, I think what
with
Laura is
budget
going to be able to really,
managers?
drill down in that, because each
Because
category
piecemealing
has
this is not
nuances.
working.
No,
right
right.
now.
Yeah.
Anybody else have any questions?
I just had a question about the tax-based growth factor. Does that come from the assessment of only private property, or does that include commercial and municipal property also?
It includes everything. It's the entire assessed valuation of Hastings. So a lot of it is, like I said, there was just overall, there was an increase when there were two things happening at once. There was the reassessment of everyone's home, and then there were some additional properties coming online.
Yeah, there's going to be a hangover of this growth factor.
Thank you.
Right? I mean, we've got to get really, that's one of the big reasons why we've got to get really focused. Because the Shaw property, there's only so much space in this town.
I each year we receive one, I'm kind of surprised by it. I mean, the year that the property first came on, and some of it is, as you noticed, that some homes, there's people who are expanding their homes and things like that, but you're right, there's a limited amount of space in Hastings, so I think we can pretty much understand that that's not going to be something we're going to receive every year. And this year, if we didn't have that growth factor, we, as I mentioned earlier early in the slide deck, our rollover budget was like over $1.8 million. So, which you're seeing, meaning that we had to bring it down like $450,000. And if we didn't have the growth factor, it would have been, been even lower, which, each couple $100,000 isn't easy, because as we mentioned, over 80% is all in staffing. So, and there's just bills, like you have to pay your Con Ed, you have to pay the water bill. So there's only so much you can cut from there, and the rest of it is in staffing. So to your point, Doug, the growth factor and trying to like understand that won't always be available to us is really critical. And to Valerie's point, the advocacy and finding alternative funding sources and being more strategic is really critical.
Well, at a high level, I just want to thank you both for taking a really critical eye. I know that there's more room to move, there's more things to look at, and as Valerie, you pointed out at the beginning, there's two sides of the equation. There's the cost side, and there's the, philosophy. The philosophy, and what, we want to cut costs, and at the same time, we need to think about investing. And it's not just about cost cutting; it's about investing. But we can't invest everywhere. And I think it's maybe something that we've gotten used to, whether it was pre-tax cap days or we got used to the growth factor, the appropriated fund balance we got used to spending. And I think we have to get really critical, take a really critical look at where do we want to invest and where can we not afford to invest right now. And it's a philosophy to get really clear on that. More work to do, but I think this is a good, great first step. And I also
Let me ask you one more question.
Let me just say that I know everyone's working hard out there. Budget managers, I know you've all been working hard. I know that only some of you are here, but it's not an easy thing to do, and you're continuing to look. And so I just want to kind of say thank you for the work now and for your continued work.
So I just one question, because it's an interesting, to me at least. So the budget is a 1.5 year-on-year increase, right? Call it. And the rollover creates 1.8. So you've already found 300.
It was actually higher than that. What I was saying is that my initial first crack, the taxes needed to support the budget were over 1.8 million.
Yeah.
So actually the rollover was higher than that, actually, when I'm thinking about it. Sorry. Yeah.
So I was wondering, just without going line by line, the areas where you were already able to find sort of the 1.8 to the 1.5.
So I think we did, we spoke about it earlier. It really is going in, and if you do a line by line, I know it kind of sounds silly, and being really like, what equipment do we need to purchase? What contracts do we need to have? What staffing, some of it, again, needs-based staffing, and looking at items and evaluating it, and having everyone go through that practice, and then tightening up everywhere we think we can and still run. It was a combination of that, and then, of course, as we receive some retirements, again, when we start the budget process, some of these things are unknown, and as other, things became known, or we understand what our staffing is looking like next year, and we're able then to either, make some tightening the belt, whether it be a little bit, or we can reduce the security, we'll reduce them by a few hours in the evening, we'll only have them until 7, things like that. I mean, it's that granular, and when you go through and between retirements and evaluating if there's a retirement of a teacher aide, and then we find that we are down a teacher aide, so that's a direct savings of close to $80,000 or $90,000 by not replacing that staff member. So it's going through that whole process, tightening up overtime, tightening up different things that Joe's department does, and really evaluating all of our staffing and all of our spending. And that's, and a couple good breaks sometimes. You get some retirements, and not that's good, but that does help reduce the cost of our operation as well.
Absolutely. And one of the things that some of you might recall from the report on the Future Jobs report, it mentions a word called upskilling. And when you look at our professional learning needs, I mean, that very much is part of that sort of philosophy, that we need to build upon the skills of various employees in the district. And so when we're not going to be able to grow staff in certain areas, but we do have people internally that we sometimes can turn to and have them be engaged in certain professional learning so that they can acquire those skills to do certain tasks that are necessary for the system to run effectively. So that is a part of it. So that may look like that's something that's strictly for in the purview of businesses, but that very much applies to us.
We did have some, I think, we spoke about an early meeting, we realized that in one of our sections we were able to collapse. But again, we're going to get into that but again, this is not driven necessarily on dollars, it's driven on student need and enrollment and class sizes. So we're not going to run 6 sections when we have 107 or 108 kids in a cohort. So that one right off the bat, when you start doing the analysis of your class sizes and your enrollment and your staffing, that was part of the rollover, but then that would be something, even if we had room under the cap, we would do, because then we might spend it doing something else, but it wouldn't, we do evaluate and look to see where our classes are and what the needs are, and that was part of that reduction that, from that original 1.8 and down to where we find ourselves now. And again, that number is fluid, and if there's any changes, we may have to come back and make additional adjustments if there's other things that may come up between now and when the board finalizes their budget. Let's hope not.
Right. Because we do have the task of bringing forward a balanced budget.
So does it make sense to move on to the school climate survey?
Oh, yes.
Okay. Thank you, guys. Really appreciate it. Okay, school climate survey.
So I'll kick this off, and I want to thank the high school leadership team, Lou and Melissa, and then the middle school team. Chris is representing Chris Endale, and Melissa. So first and foremost, just sort of to frame why we, what's the sort of origin and purpose of the school climate survey. Schools are for students. I mean, that's a given, but we rarely ask them anything about their experience at the school. It's a real missed opportunity since students walk around all day long collecting data. That's what they do. And perception data from students can give us all some really good information about, how they're experiencing, the system in terms of teaching, learning, and the school climate, and what it feels like being in the schools and walking the halls or being anywhere in school. And without this information, we often end up treating the symptoms rather than getting at the root causes, and it can sometimes trick ourselves into believing there's a reality that isn't a reality. We don't get to gain a stronger sense of how students feel about their school, about the sense of safety and belonging, school engagement, and school teacher and student relationships. And school climate surveys have grown in terms of interest and priority in school districts because, as we, not simply from the standpoint of safety, but from the standpoint of social emotional awareness. How are children doing? And then that likelihood of something emerging, that could potentially be, a crisis in a school. But it's also this notion that we can learn a lot from children. Panorama is a company that actually has been in existence since 2014 and is a developer in this world of student surveys. And it was developed in collaboration with the Panorama Education, Harvard Graduate School of Education, so it's a very reputable tool. It currently is being used in 15 countries, available in 12 languages, 46 states, 900 districts, 11,500 schools, and 9 million students. So when our students take completed these 30 questions or 31 questions, it's benchmarked against those many students. On December 9th.
Valerie, the Panorama Student Survey is for middle school and high school?
Yes, grades 6 through 12. Third, fourth, and fifth can take the assessment, but the survey, but we chose not to give that to them. So we administered an agreement with our building leaders who felt that there's a value in asking students their perceptions of what's going on in schools and how they see schools, especially around certain issues. I started out by talking about certain incidents were happening, certain incidents of anti-Semitism happening around the country, but also in this region. Surveys are ways in which we can gain some information about what children see, think, feel, and then drill down more deeply. And you'll hear about that from the building administrators shortly. So we administered it to our 6th through 12th graders here. So 94% of the students in the middle school took the assessment, 360 out of 383. It was not mandatory. Some students did not take it, and parents did not want them to take it, and that's fine. 85.4% of the high school students did complete the survey, so 440 out of 520, so a pretty large sample size. So from the standpoint of our survey data, this has been shared and it is on, it's available to be consumed. We're not here to hide anything. We're here to show you, this is what we learned and now these are the actions that we're going to take. There's certain things that we're not happy with, but it's not about covering up. It's not about minimizing those things. It's about taking action. So I appreciate the candor and the courage of the leaders here tonight who are going to speak to those things and share those things. And in the next few slides, you'll see some of those areas that the administrators are working on or have been working on, and maybe this data from the survey helps them to switch gears. And then Ms. Szymanski will close by talking about some additional considerations. Mr. Adepietro. Thank you.
Hello, everyone. Before we get started on the survey data, I want to walk you through Melissa and I's feelings when Valerie sent us the first initial email with our access to the data. It was 7:30 in the morning. We opened up the email. We went on Panorama, and I was in utter shock and disappointment. And I said, this can't be true. Our kids love our building. They love me. They love their teachers. They love everything about Hastings. I don't get it. We sat with Valerie and Melissa at one of our building meetings. We unpacked it together, and we started looking at the data a little deeper, and we started to understand a little bit better what exactly we were looking at. So we still didn't feel great, but we felt better. This past Tuesday, I unpacked the data with our student union at a morning meeting. And I have to tell you, kids come from a totally different place. And their answer all morning was, Mr. Ray, that's not so bad. look at it. I mean, and I'll show you what they're talking about. So I'm in a great place, and Melissa's in a good place as well. These are all things we can fix. Okay, so I just wanted to give you that. So the utter shock that you probably have tonight will go away in a couple of weeks as you unpack a little further. So the middle school team and the high school team sort of work together on these slides so that we're kind of consistent in how we show it to you guys. But these are the 5 areas that the survey looks at. School safety, school climate, school teacher and student relationships, belonging, and engagement. And obviously we scored the highest, the most favorable, in school safety. But if you look at the other percentages, at first glance, you're like, what? Only 20% of our kids report that they're engaged in school. That's the reaction that we had. But let's unpack a little bit. So let's look at school safety. What we tried to do, both administrative teams, is sort of pull out 2 questions. One that we scored what we believe is the most favorable in that category, and one that we scored not so favorable in that category. But if you unpack it, if you look at this, so what does school safety mean? Perceptions of students' physical and psychological safety at school. So students believe they're safe at school, but if you look to the right where we scored really, really well, question 4 says, how often do you worry about violence at your school? And if you look at the green bars, right, once in a while and almost never comprise almost 90% of our student answers. So kids feel safe. They don't believe we have a violent culture. You can even add the sometimes category into that, and now we're at 99%. That's how the students taught me how to read this. Okay? If you look to the left at question 1, how often are people disrespectful to others in your school? So students report there is a level of disrespect amongst each other. But again, if you look at how it's broken down, sometimes to almost never still comprise almost 60%. So it depends on how you want to read the data. But there is a level of disrespect among students in our high school. Okay? Let's move on. And obviously, if you look at the entire climate survey, which you'll have access to, there were a total of 6 questions in this category. School climate. At first look, only 44% of the students say that it was a favorable area for us. What is school climate? The perception of the overall social and emotional climate of our school. Again, 2 questions. Our least favorable was question 1. How often are people, excuse me, I'm reading the wrong one. How positive or negative is the energy in the school? It was almost an indifference as far as energy. Some people said there's a lot of positive energy. Some said there's a lot of negative energy. And many of the students are in between. There's some negative, there's some positive. To the right, question 4, at your school, how much does the behavior of other students, hurt or help your learning? The majority answered that it really has no effect. And that's in the middle, it's 47%. And that's your typical bell curve that you probably normally see on these kinds of surveys. But again, if you look at just the percentage of favorable, you would think we're really, really terrible in this. So again, it's a little bit of both, but nothing that we can't address. Student and teacher relationships. This one was the one that really hit me hard. I'm here 15 years. If we go back to when we presented about the Challenge Success Survey data, students reported, 64% of our students reported that they have an adult that they can turn to in our building. That was student-reported data. That number didn't match until you unpack it. Okay? So if you look at question 4, when your teachers ask you how you are doing, how many of them are really interested in your answers? Again, it's a subjective question, but if you look at the percentages, about half of my teachers is in the middle, that's 19%, but when you add up everything above that, you're at almost 60%, 57, 58%. That's closer to what they reported on the Challenge Success Survey. And then if you look down below that, a few of my teachers means there's some. So they're not discounting it altogether. So again, it's how you really interpret that data. So this matches what we really got on the Challenge Success side. And then a positive rating, how many of your teachers?
Can I say something here?
Yeah.
I really think in this question, none of my teachers is the cutoff and everything else is above.
And that was how the students were looking at it.
Yeah.
And they said, Ms.
I mean,
Gray,
if
what are you talking
you
about?
have a few teachers that are-
92% really have somebody. They might not have multiple people, but they have somebody.
Just one
Yeah.
question on this. First, I noticed when I was looking at this before the meeting, the first question, the first slide reflected the national bell curve. Because
Correct.
I think a key
Right there.
takeaway, yeah. Is that
We were above, just on that one, I felt that we needed to put that. Our school is safe, perceived to be safe at a much higher rate than national average.
Yeah. How does this bell curve look for other questions?
For the other questions, we're almost right on par.
Right on par.
Yeah,
That's what
we're
I was
almost right on par. A little bit lower in some areas, a little bit higher, but nothing significant.
Not standing out.
Correct.
Okay.
School belonging. Again, school belonging, how much do students feel they are valued members of our school community? If you look at question 1, how connected do you feel to the adults in your school? Again, it's how you read the question. Anywhere from slightly connected all the way up would give you, 87%. If you want to discount slightly connected, then you're somewhere around 50%. But there's some connection there. Overall, how do you feel like you belong in your school? Different phrasing. Most kids say they belong a little bit, if not more than that. But if you look at that 35% favorable, it's very deceiving for me. So it's important that you unpack each question, I think, to really understand the data. One more category. Student engagement. This was our lowest favorability rating. How attentive and invested are you in school? Again, let's go back to the Challenge Success Survey data. And 55% of our students reported in the Challenge Success data that they're doing school, just doing school. What did that mean when they said doing school? It means they're doing all of the work, but they're not really enjoying it or invested in it. Okay, they're doing it because they have to. This kind of reinforced that. How excited are you about going to your classes? Anywhere from somewhat exciting and up is about 43%. If you want to count slightly excited, which I don't count, it's more than that, but it's around 50%, and that's where we are with the Challenge Success data. Overall, how interested are you in your classes? Here, there's an interest, but that doesn't mean they're excited. If that makes any kind of sense.
I think, I don't know.
Let's keep going.
Can I just say something?
Yeah.
How many adolescents say they're excited about I just feel like there's something about that question that doesn't, interested is one thing, but excited about going to school, I don't know.
I'll give you a little other tidbit on excited.
Maybe excited.
When you looked
to
at
go
by
hang out with
grade,
friends.
9, 10, 11, and 12, when you got to grade 11, there was a significant spike in excitement. And I'll tell you why. It's because it's really the first experience where students are actually picking whatever courses they want to go into as far as math, science, levels of social studies. APs are in that level. In 9th and 10th grade, your curriculum is pretty much prescribed. So the excitement level is expected to be lower as it is for 11th and 12th graders. Okay?
What does favorable mean?
Say that again?
What does favorable mean?
I lost my spot. But favorable is...
Okay, going the wrong way.
I'm going the wrong way. No, hold on. Sorry, guys. Sorry, I left my finger on the button. Okay, sorry. Okay, so it's 20% favorable. They were only counting the green. An average of the greens. Correct.
Quite
excited.
Okay?
Is there a spot where this is normed nationally?
There are in the entire data package, They are. There are national rankings.
How is this norm national? Because it doesn't look like it. It's, like, as I read it here, I think maybe to your point, Joe, it doesn't look that different from how I might guess high schools are. And so norm nationally, it wouldn't come at a 20%, it would seem to be higher than that. But I'm just curious. But that's something to look at. I mean,
Kids being interested in their
Well, that's what you're
classes.
saying, is on the national bell curve, everything comes out about average.
Yeah, we're pretty on par with many suburban, and it breaks it down urban and suburban. We're pretty on par with many suburban districts. But again, that doesn't mean we should be ignoring the
Just means
data,
the
right?
20% favor, there's something with that data point that's off as far as norming it for like a national.
No, and we may not want to be on par, but I think there are other ways to look at this stuff.
I think it's important to not get caught up on the percentages and really unpack the data as far as the questions are concerned. And we'll talk about it right now. I mean, what are we going to do with this data, right? So it's already been brought to our MTSS team. We're going to unpack it with some of our department chairs. It'll go tomorrow to our PBIS team and our Challenge Success teams. All going to get this data to sort of, talk about it, unpack it, play with it, and come up with any kind of suggestions or conversations that need to happen moving forward. We absolutely want to share this data with our students. The question is how we do that. We've already shared it with the student union. My thought and Melissa's thought is that we share it at grade level meetings. I can tell you the feedback from our students is that they're surveyed out over the last year. They've taken the Challenge Success Survey, they've taken the Youth Assessment Survey, they've taken the Climate Survey, and I'm going to, full disclosure, some kids thought it was about climate change. And then when they started the survey, this is not about climate change.
Well, it is about climate change.
On Wednesday, we will be sharing it with our faculty at a faculty meeting. And then the key is to work with students and staff to really develop activities to promote more student engagement, more belonging. For example, if anybody was around Friday night, we had our first talent show that was created by the students. It was wonderful. It really was. We had half an auditorium filled, which was a lot more than I thought was going to show up. All students, we had some parents, but it was really a nice night. And today, the talk in the building was about the talent show and how wonderful it was, and all the acts and the few teachers that performed, and how wonderful the police department was with their gifts and so forth and so on. So more things like that.
And that's when there was a big basketball game going on at the same time.
Big basketball game going on at the same time, exactly. Academic Field Day is next, it's on March 6th, teamed up with the Olympics in the afternoon. We've been talking about having multiple pep rallies per year, one for each season. Those are things that we're talking about, but they're just examples of feel-good things for kids, right? We want to work with our students and staff to find opportunities to improve our building aesthetics. One big thing that bothers me, but it doesn't bother students, is our kids everywhere and anywhere in our buildings. It causes a multitude of issues. So can we work together to figure out some sort of system where we keep our building clean, right? As anybody who knows Mr. A knows he's afraid of mice. And when there's food around, mice are around. You're never going to stop that. It has nothing to do with the cleanliness of our building and the buildings and ground staff. It has to do with mice live here too. So could we come up with any kind of beautification projects? Can our kids, like they go into the woods and clean up the woods, could they clean up our building? So forth and so on. Continue our PBIS work. This is going to be important in that. Continue our Challenge Success work. Find opportunities to engage our students in dialogue. Something I did when I first became principal that I've abandoned over the last few years is something that Valerie does with our students, is an advisory group. Reinstate an advisory group of students that are a cross-section of our building. And I want to hear from them. Re-administer the survey at some point. We'll talk about that with the rest of the administrative staff, and then reevaluate what we're doing. That's basically the high school.
Thank you.
Okay.
Thank you. Thank you.
You're welcome. Chris?
The downside of going second is they stole most of my brilliant insights. So you'll see a lot of similar patterns. So unlike the high school, our survey was only available for students in grades 6 through 8. So we admit to being interested in what the survey results would have looked like if we had been able to include our entire student body. The survey presents the findings in the 5 buckets you see above. It then puts answers into favorable or unfavorable readings. When looking through the survey design through a statistician's lens, there were times when we were surprised a certain response would be considered unfavorable. However, when looking at it through a school building leader's lens, anything less than perfect would have been unfavorable. So we kind of balanced those two. Questions about wording were also asked by a few of our students in emails sent directly to the superintendent, asking what exactly do they mean by connection.
I was a help desk.
Yes, yes. So Valerie came down and said, who are these students? And I must know. They were still working on the survey. So we come to the first bucket, which is school belonging, in which 45% of our students responded favorably. By school belonging, you'll see that the survey really indicates how much students feel that they are valued members of the school community. 2 out of 5 of the questions posed are highlighted above. Like Lou had mentioned, we pulled out answers on the highest and lowest ends of the spectrum, a glow and a grow. You'll see that 57% of our student respondents feel somewhat connected, quite connected, or extremely connected to the adults at school. This was the first question on the survey, and the results, again, because of the way they calculate favorability, were pretty sobering. We were really disappointed by the responses. The numbers indicating that 43% of our students only felt slight to no connections has been a conversation piece for us in our support team meetings, and it's critical to the response that we'll detail in a few slides. Meanwhile, the general sense of belongingness as measured by the final question in the section is quite high. The fact that the numbers improved as students took the survey made me wish that there were more questions. 65% of students indicated that they completely belong or belong quite a bit, while 19% believe they belong somewhat. Again, the percentages of a little bit and do not belong at all are lower, but they stand out, and they will drive our response. School climate is the next area, and you'll see that 49% of our students responded favorably to questions related to their perceptions of overall social and learning climate of the school. 59% of the students find the physical space of our school to be slightly pleasant to very pleasant, while 24% find it neither pleasant or unpleasant. We do note, however, that 16% of our students find the physical space slightly to very unpleasant, but we're working with the high school in their response to building aesthetics due to our sharing a space. In terms of behavior of students impacting our students' learning, this was an area where most students took a neutral position. Again, we tend to think that when you ask a middle schooler a question, they kind of go to the middle, it's fine, it's good. So this kind of stood out to us. Although approximately 36% of students indicated a negative impact of student behavior on their learning. And this is a data point that's driving our work with the PBIS committee. School engagement, much like in the high school, was an area in which students responded low favorability, 30% favorability to questions about attentiveness and investment in school. The first question, how excited are you about going to your classes? Somewhat excited to extremely excited constituted approximately 60% of our students. Those that were slightly or not at all were approximately 40% of the students. While we like to believe that a student answering this on a cold Monday morning would be feeling some sort of way toward class, we are taking this seriously and sharing this with our department chairs. Our department chairs, however, are going to be really excited to learn that 80% of our students were either somewhat to extremely interested in their classes. And we find the distinction between interested and excited, kind of like you were mentioning earlier, pretty interesting. We might be interested to attend a lecture series, but excited to attend a concert. So again, this information continues to drive our response. Lastly, in this bucket, we had our highest favorability percentage, with 72% of students reporting that they feel physically and psychologically safe at school. We are heartened by these numbers. We are thrilled that the survey examined psychological safety, because at the middle school we know how important it is for students to feel psychologically safe. Certainly students can't access curriculum if they're feeling anxious and unsafe. One of the APA principles for psychology in pre-K to 12 teaching and learning environments states that emotional well-being influences educational performance, learning, and development. This is a reason that so much of our focus on SEL programs comes out through our work with Ruler, PBIS, and Second Step. Our highest favorable response in this category was in regard to fear of school fights, which was it was beyond 90%. We didn't include it here, but we're happy with it. We did instead include question 3, which also was among one of our highest responses, that indicates how unlikely it is that students will experience online bullying. Almost 90% of students said that this is highly unlikely to happen, and this is really terrific given the work our school's done in this area, even with our most recent presentation with John Halligan. Question 1 on the right side is definitely a grow for us. This talks about the level of respect. 30% feel as if people are frequently or always disrespectful to others at school. And this is a concerning statistic, no matter how you cut it, and it is one that we are reviewing with our PBIS committee. One of our core expectations is be respectful. We have 4. That's one of them. So we're going to share with teachers ways that they can make an effort to reward this behavior when it's observed, to help promote these visible displays of respect, and hopefully move the bell curve in the direction of favorability. There's also...
That's one more question, and this may be also for most of you guys. Was there any qualitative in this at all? Any write-in descriptions? Nothing? Okay.
There wasn't, but part of our follow-up will be using this in focus groups with students. Tell us what you thought about this, what inspired you to answer this, do you agree with that? There's also very encouraging responses to the question of if a student were bullied in school, how easy it would be to get help from an adult. Approximately 70% of students responded favorably to this, which again prompted reflection because earlier there was the low favorability as to student connection to adults, but the high favorability indicated when students were looking for support in a bullying situation, spoke to the level of relationships that kids have with adults, and we wanted to explore that more with students in those follow-up conversations. So we've discussed this with our SST at our weekly meetings, this data. Moving forward, we intend to continue to unpack it with a comprehensive review. We're pulling together a committee with broad representation. Our goal will be to identify areas for growth and areas for us to build on. In addition, we will share the results and research with faculty, engage in breakout discussion groups at faculty meetings. We believe that this group of people that we have listed up here will be able to identify supports and interventions that range from the academic to the social and emotional. We also want to explore student perceptions. We'll push into classes to share the results of the survey. These findings serve as a springboard for conversations that we will conduct with our students in different grades. Additionally, we will work with our student leadership groups to determine additional interventions based on results from these focus groups that can help boost the culture of our school community. And lastly, we'll continue our work with families. We'll use this data in our work with our building leadership team. Our BLT is made up of family representatives and building leaders, and we have focused on ways to bring SEL resources that we use here in school to families. The results of this work that's been taking place with the BLT will be an upcoming SEL toolkit for families presentation at our March PTSA meeting.
Okay, so the Panorama survey data in conjunction with other school data have provided some insights on avenues that we can take district-wide to pursue further. So you heard each of the buildings speak to what they're going to do with the findings, and there are also some actions as a system that we're continuing to focus on. So first, Panorama provides a number of resources that are correlated with areas for improvement that schools and districts are facing in terms of their areas of need. Our biggest areas for growth that emerged in this in both buildings were around belonging and engagement. So that stood out in both of the buildings. So belonging is this idea of a fundamental for human motivation, and so it really permeates all aspects of social life. And within Panorama, they shared some survey research that was conducted with younger adolescents, which showed a correlation between school belonging and also motivation. So I included a link in the slide deck to one of the Panorama resources, which is from the American Psychological Association. The Coalition for Psychology in Schools and Education gives a list of 20 principles from psychology that are relevant to K-12 educators in 5 different areas. The first is student thinking and learning. The second, student motivation. The third, classroom dynamics and supportive relationships. The fourth, classroom management. And then the fifth is really around assessing student progress. So when we were meeting together in preparation for this discussion tonight, one of the administrators suggested that this could be unpacked, this resource, at a faculty meeting, so that these principles could be applied to practice. And Panorama also suggests a number of different resources to support classroom culture, including things like positive affirmations and cultivating strong peer-to-peer interactions. So it provides some links embedded for the administrators to work with that we've all been digging into as well. So beyond enhancing our theoretical understandings, we'll need to continue our concrete work with the development of our K-12 MTSS plan. Having strong processes around analyzing data, identifying students in need of targeted academic, social, and emotional supports, working collaboratively to design and implement interventions, and ensuring progress monitoring will all work in service to strengthening climate. And also, we'll need to determine a K-12 social-emotional learning curriculum. We have work happening around character education at the elementary school. We do have ruler at the middle school. And thinking about social-emotional work at the high school level as well. And we have pieces like the PBIS. And we're thinking about how we're moving all of that K-12 so that there's a full arc for social-emotional learning and also PBIS. We'll also need to gain a deeper understanding of how students are experiencing their concerns, and Valerie started us off that way. So it's really around thinking about the perceptions data and getting in there and talking to students. And you heard that from both buildings around really going to the source and having ongoing conversations with the children. And this means beyond just the children who participate in student government. We were thinking about that together, and when we're thinking about belonging and engagement, we're thinking about who else do we need to talk to other than some of the voices who typically come together and are very active in sharing their perceptions. So again, this will entail working with a task force comprised of students and adults, and conducting the focus groups, conducting interviews. And from those different forums, representations beyond the ones outlined tonight will also emerge, and you did hear that theme. We have our recommendations, but also the deeper we have an understanding of how students are experiencing things here in Hastings, we'll be able to provide additional interventions, if you will, in terms of school climate, to think about how we can keep moving towards better. The building PBIS teams can also identify some of these things. And the data has already begun to be shared with students. We can also continue that work at assemblies. Targeted assemblies that are in addition to cultural enrichment experiences will need to be designed to communicate expectations to students, encourage that sense of belonging and engagement. And one example is the Chris Heron Assembly from this year. So things to that regard that will really help in terms of encouraging that sense of belonging and our expectations. And finally, a panorama survey in the spring will enable us to see the extent to which we're able to move the needle between now and then, and to inform future actions that will be necessary. Thank you.
Any questions?
Well, thank you for doing this. I mean, I think it is a big look at what's going on, but one you already started with this project, the name, Challenge Success. So a lot of the similar information. I'm understanding how the sense of belonging increases motivation, which could impact engagement. I'm just wondering how you see getting at some of the classroom or curriculum aspects of these questions that are embedded in engagement as well. Is that through more conversation and teasing out what they really meant by that, or how do you?
Yeah.
I mean, I think it's actually having conversations with students. Because even tonight, I mean, we started talking about excitement versus interest, and I think that's got to come organically from students. So I think that's how you do it. And I agree with Melissa. It's not just the student union. Yeah, they're elected to represent everyone, but there are many silent voices in our schools that we need to get to. And I think that happens in small groups rather than larger groups. So I think it's a matter of listening. And sometimes you don't just listen with your ears, you have to listen with your heart. And students often act out because something else is going on that they're not really ready to tell you. So I'm going to try to see if we can catch that earlier. And I know it's very simple, but a night like a Friday night's talent show and the conversations that were happening in the building today goes a long way towards kids saying, oh, I wish I was there, I wish it sounded like such an event. Next year I'm doing X, Y, and Z.
Right.
Those kinds of conversations build, right? So, Jude, who's a senior or vice president, said, I wish I was here, not graduating for next year. I think we could pack the house next year. So that's the kind of conversation we want to hear.
So we'll also need to think about the student learning experiences, right? So, following our initial discussion as a leadership team, I was curious and I dipped into some peer-reviewed research, and it was really interesting to find in a few different articles. And I didn't spend very long in there, admittedly, but just to dip into a couple of the different articles. The idea that there are authentic connections to student learning, and the idea that students have opportunities for relationship building through the experiences that they are going through in their classrooms, that they are that experiences are very student-centered. It's very important that we're considering that. So in any curricular endeavor that we're engaging in, and Valerie has been talking a lot about, through the book clubs, through the curriculum teaching and learning thought group, and the work that we've been doing around skills, thinking about collaboration, for example, and that is a prime opportunity for cultivating student motivation and engagement and a sense of interconnectedness. So thinking about where are we headed, and thinking about the competencies that we value for students moving forward, and then how is that reflected in our curriculum work will be really a critical component.
And how you'll use those skills in the real world. We took a trip to BOCES today, and we were, all of us who were there were really amazed at how well invested the teachers were, but also the students. And we were talking about what seemed to drive that. And maybe some of it is that they know, I will need this skill when I go out to do this on my own, and when they practice on people who come in for them to experiment with, or the show they're creating, there is that sense of immediacy. I see how I will use this, which was really a strong takeaway. Yeah. So this is a great step. Thank you.
I also wanted to say thank you, and I think that I'm glad you touched on the idea that it shouldn't just be the student union representatives or even those that volunteered to do the, performances at the talent show, or even talked about the talent show, that the fact that this survey will routinely give all students the opportunity for an anonymous voice, I think is really essential for young people. And I'm glad that we're pursuing this endeavor. And just sort of separately on this idea of belonging, coming at, with my background in early childhood and working in classrooms, a sense of belonging is often tapped into with young people, the youngest people, by giving them responsibility and having them have real roles in the classroom, where if they're absent, what they do is missed. And I think that can be extended to older children, in this idea that you're talking about cleaning up the high school. I think those are the types of pieces that give even adolescents a sense of belonging, when they have real roles to have in a school community.
Okay. Thank you.
you.
Thank you.
Thank you all.
Thank you.
Good night.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Bye-bye.
I'm good. Good night, everybody.
Good night.
Good night. Thanks, guys.
Thank you so much.
Okay, we will try to move through the rest of the agenda with some focus and speed. Okay, business items. Anybody have any questions on the business items 1 through 19? Do I have a motion to approve business items 1 through 19? And a second?
Second.
All in favor? Placement for CSC and CPSC services. Do I have a motion to approve these placements?
So moved.
And a second?
Second.
All in favor? Appointments, we've already done tenure, and we've done those votes. So A and C and D, any questions or comments?
I did have one quick question. I remember that there was something about football maybe merging with other towns. I noticed in the Schedule B, there's a football coach, but are we talking about maybe?
No, we're not merging. I mean, we have a merge modify program, but that still requires us to hire 2 modified coaches, and Irvington, who we're merged with just our modified program, hires 2 coaches to accompany their students to come here. So it doesn't save costs, it just allows the team to be
Bigger.
yeah, like a better, yes, yes. Actually, the football varsity program has grown.
Has it?
Yeah, it's actually over 40 students.
Wow.
No, just thinking about football. Gonna bring it up sometime again.
Okay, do I have a motion to approve the items in 5A, C, and D?
So moved.
A second?
Second.
All in favor? Minutes from the Jan 27 meetings. Anybody have any changes, updates, comments? Do I have a motion to approve those minutes?
So moved.
Second?
Second.
All in favor? Okay. Committee report for policy.
I'll keep it brief, but we did meet a few weeks ago, and Valerie and Melissa presented to the committee that New York State will be having a new data privacy policy that will come in effect this summer. So they received a notification about it, but we're going to wait to see how NYSBA gives us a guideline for how to create that policy, but that will be a new policy that we'll be working on. And we spent a bit of time talking a bit about future adjustments to our student attendance policy to be reflective of the requirements in ESSA. Because as they state now, there is no mention of our policy as it applies to the elementary school. And we also briefly talked about the organization chart, continuing to look at that to be reflective of the current staffing we have in the district.
Advocacy.
Sure, that's part of, yes, we had it on an earlier agenda. A number of us around the table have participated in various events sponsored by the Westchester Public School Boards Association, which is a collection of school districts around the region who do engage in advocacy activities. So recently, Jeremy and I attended one which was Meet the Legislators. And in December, Allison, Sylvia and I attended a session that was held at Valhalla location again, and that one was a focus on advocacy. And a number of us had a conversation as a follow-up from that meeting with Ray Sanchez and Frank Schnicker, who was the board president in Austin, because they have approached advocacy very differently. And I think that it would be helpful to have conversation about this board's activities and interests, because what Maureen and I described, and some of you around the table know very well, what we talked about in terms of the challenges in our budget are real and are not going away. I think, there are a number of signs of that, in terms of just shifts in the demographic of the community that, make this a really important conversation to have. As I said earlier, it's really clear in all of the communications from our governor and the state of dress and, all the events that we've been to, our governor does not see Westchester District's need. Just doesn't. And I mentioned the Espinosa versus Nevada, the case. Those are things you need to think about, that are happening. That's real, that's serious. We were sitting at the table, Jeremy and I, at the Meet the Legislator group, and two of the districts in the region were talking about, it was two of the larger districts in the region were talking about how impactful students who leave their district to go to a charter school is on the district. The funds go with the child. So that's $26,000. And so those kinds of changes are happening under our noses, and it behooves us to really know and really start. Which we've all heard, even on the phone call with our new sort of friends in Austin. We've got to mobilize in some way and start bringing this to the attention of others in the region who have issues or who have an interest in, or if they don't think that they have an interest in this, that they do. Or otherwise, it's going to, this forecast of what's to come is only going to be more difficult. Cutting is not a strategy. It's not. It simply is not sustainable. And and yet, I don't know to what degree the public even knows about any of this. We're all sort of fighting over the crumbs, right? And there's something much more, significant that's underway. I even heard that evening that potentially it's a long-term strategy to consolidate smaller districts. Put the pressure on them to a certain extent, and it really is a significant amount of pressure in those smaller districts upstate. And when this person mentioned that, I said, that kind of is not far-fetched. And that was, apparently a part of a conversation earlier, in an early part of the campaign. That there are a lot of these smaller districts, and they need to consolidate. So the pressure is not the pressure is not going to sort of subside around this degree to which we don't have increases in revenue, but yet we still have increases in cost. And it's not because we're doing anything bad; it's because we have increases in cost. So I open it to the rest of you to think about, how do we want to proceed? Because I think silence is not a strategy for us.
Can I just say one thing? Just because we've spoken about this, Valerie and I, and my group of the business officials, we meet with the legislators a few times a year. And I think one thing that I've always heard loud and clear from them is that it's great that school leaders speak to them, but what speaks the loudest to them is kind of the old-fashioned, like either letter writing campaigns or calls to local groups, because really, if they do not hear from people that there's some concerns, they're left with, well, I'm not going to go up there and fight over things that are of no concern. So it's really about educating people about different things and the impacts they have on us. And there's even been changes to the STAR program, and that the governor has put in place. And some of people's tax increases that they're experiencing are because there's now a reduction in some of the STAR, but just understanding the nuances of those things. And it's important to educate people, because they need then to rally their local legislators to, to help on their behalf. These issues that we all, we're unique in some of the things that are impactful to us. It's important that they hear from residents, and, we need the board to kind of educate. We need to educate the residents so they know what things they should be, working on to, make sure that those impacts, because there are some revenue pieces that are impacted by changes that are proposed that sometimes you don't realize, and different decisions, like if there's money going here, then it's not going there. So it is extremely important to make sure, whether it be the charter schools or whether it be different, set-asides that the governor has, he has, his kind of focus, and if the dollars are going there, then they're not coming here, so.
If he doesn't hear from this region.
Correct. Then he just feels like, okay, so that's kind of important for people to understand that that you have to kind of.
Well, I think we could work with the PTSA and SEPTA about that.
There used to be kind of, and I think the time is coming around that it is important, and I do think, as much as you don't think people may think it falls on deaf ears, that's who they will respond to. They're not going to really respond to me going there and saying, well, they're like, well, nobody in your district seems to have an issue with it. So I know Avenante always says that. And it does speak volumes to them when they hear from residents in their districts.
I think something we learned from talking to Ossining, the people in Ossining, was to identify what our needs are and trying to find some other local districts who have a similar need, and then you can work together to highlight that, and then get your community groups involved, the PTSA, HEF, SEPTA, in writing letters or social media or whatever it is, to really highlight that this is a need. It turns out, I think he said there were 700 districts in our area, but only 40-something of those districts have had an increase in students. And we're one of those districts. So, there are all these little parts that aren't being recognized. That will take some work on our part, and then we'll need to partner with people. But it's exciting in the sense that there is kind of a direction to go. It's not immediate results, it doesn't sound like, but there are tangible steps that we can start to take.
So as far as next steps go, is it a group of people? I know we've had an advocacy group, but it was really focused on kind of more just narrow testing issues.
Yeah, it needs to be much bigger.
Should there be an advocacy committee of a few people that are teaming up? Here's the one or two issues we should focus on, and here's a couple of strategies. What's the best, I may be asking the board, what's the best next step as a strategy here?
I mean, we are just starting to learn what's happening to begin with. So, I mean, over the break, we're going to attend a budget meeting given by a local representative. So I feel like we have a little more information gathering to do, but then it wouldn't be a bad idea to try to either have a smaller group come together to decide a few next steps, or if we should talk to people in another community that has some similar issues. But I think we do need to identify some of those first. And I'm not quite sure the best person to speak to about that.
And it's even becoming familiar with what the calendar is for the year. So for this year, since a lot of it began already in the fall, we've lost any opportunity for lobby ourselves, just given how the state's budget is released.
Right.
So what the people in Ossining, who are obviously much more experienced and have worked at this for some time, they were suggesting that we kind of get our feet wet in terms of understanding who the players are, forging a relationship with them. As Allison referred to, Andrea Stewart-Cousins is having a budget forum in which she invites members of her constituency to meet, and it has a number of members of the Senate committee, some of whom are very powerful when it comes to education issues. So it's important for us to just establish a face presence with somebody like Andrea Stewart-Cousins, with Avenante, with whoever the person is who we would be in a place to lobby, to basically organize the troops here in our community so that they have an understanding that, as in other contexts, whether it's been in the opt-out movement, they are responsive to people who raise their voice. And so we want to just do it in a place so that they, come cut the ribbon when we open the cafetorium, or whatever it is, all those little things, so that they remember us like, oh yeah, that's Squeaky Wheel in Hastings, that I need to give them the money because they're doing all this stuff. So it's more that. It's establishing FaceTime now because it's kind of a dead time. And we kind of have some lead time to get ourselves up and running for when the next cycle comes around. I mean, that's how I understood it anyway.
I think that's right. And taking this time to sort of hone what your ask is and what your story needs to become. And that might take, thinking amongst all of us first before we reach out to a bigger group.
I mean, the fact we're so lucky that Andrea Stewart Cousins, I mean, she's a local person as well. And I mean, she's actually the head of the education chair. I mean, there's the 3 people, and like she's one of the, like they say, there's three people in a room in Albany, and she's one of them.
Right, and she's in our backyard.
She's in our backyard, and this is her area. I mean, obviously Yonkers is her, the majority of that, but even like Shelley Mayer, and the fact that these people are local to us is a real advantage. Like, this is the first time, because many times the person in her role would be from upstate New York, and I think she really has a unique understanding of the river towns. I know that just from speaking with her. So I think it's, like you said, honing that relationship is, and it's wonderful that, that we have someone like her that's representing this local constituency.
So for example, if anybody were to be interested in attending that type of forum, that's actually going to be happening while we have our break. So Allison and I are planning on attending, but certainly the more that could join with us just to meet these folks, it's going to be, I think, on the 18th from like 10 in the morning to 2 in the afternoon. So even if we just drop in and, listen in and meet the people and press the flesh, it's worth the time.
So do we want to maybe have you guys just kind of start seeding the conversation and then bring it back to the board?
No problem.
Okay. No second public comment. Board of Ed comments.
I have 2 comments I just want to make. One is thoughts about tonight, and just this is some food for thought. I do miss the beginning of the board meeting when we used to have like some pictures and things going on in the district, and I think. Just saying, I think that's a nice thing that people see, and about what's going on. And also, my preference would be when we do tenure, that we start the meeting, we have public comment, and then we skip through, in whatever announcements, and then skip to tenure, not just start off right with doing tenure. I think it's it's like the meeting hasn't even started and we're sort of doing tenure. That's just my own personal thing. My other thing is that could you just tell me where we are with talking about some of the issues we're going to discuss about the calendar and other holidays?
Where we are now is we're just finalizing what we've called March 18th. I mean, the issue is this. It's through Maureen's diligence that we discovered this now. Had we discovered it later, it would have been, much more difficult for the district. So, my own personal approach to developing a calendar is to pull the presidents and the vice presidents together of all the bargaining units, because they're the ones who have to decide, and help determine the development of the calendar. So the question of this instructional time from 2:45 to 3:15 has always kind of been prickly.
Well, I'm talking about holidays like Eid and...
But it's all connected.
Oh, okay. It's all connected in terms of hours, that kind of required in numbers of days.
And so federal holidays.
Right, and there are only so many. And we're already sort of skating on thin ice with regards to having enough days if this was really a
well, I don't know who's discussing it. I want to put an idea out there for you to think about that I've raised in the past, possibly not very popular, but I don't know that when we're considering a calendar that we need to have 2 days off for Rosh Hashanah. I say that as someone who is Jewish, as someone who observes 2 days. A lot of people do not. And I think there are other holidays that need to be considered.
I don't think the way it falls this year I think it's over a weekend, Jody. I think it's just this upcoming calendar. There would not be 2 days anyway. For this, I'm just saying, are you talking about the upcoming school calendar?
No, I'm
That one?
talking in general.
No,
Do
no,
we come up
okay.
with a policy in
Gotcha.
general? I think that's something to
okay.
think about. I think that there's a long history to that, to those holidays in New York City and New York State. I think demographics have changed. I know in New York City, I think they give the Chinese New Year also, do they not? Same calendar. The challenge is this, you only have so many days, and this came up in our diversity committee meeting. It's a lot more difficult than you think. I'm sure it's really difficult. You only have so many days to work with. Okay, but that's why I'm just throwing out one option is to give one day for Rosh Hashanah. People can opt to keep their children out the other day, just like other religions have to opt to keep their kids out on days. It can be an excused absence. Yeah. But there are certainly many people who don't observe that holiday for 2 days. And if we're struggling to find time, I put that
saying
out
next
for
year it's not an
discussion.
issue, I don't think.
When is the day that where you expect us to see the first version of the calendar?
March 2nd.
March 2nd.
Okay.
Any other comments? The motion to adjourn.
Motion to adjourn.
Do I have a second?
Second.
All in favor? Thank you. Meeting adjourned.